The cathedral doors exploded open mid-vow, rain pouring through the entrance like God himself had come to object. Every head whipped around to see the man in the black overcoat walking down the aisle with the kind of calm that made grown men reach for weapons they didn't have. Dante Moretti stopped beside the trembling bride, looked the groom dead in the eye, and spoke 5 words that shattered Charleston's most powerful family. "She's not marrying you today." But this wasn't a love story. This was a declaration of war against a dynasty built on buried bodies and silent screams. And Celine Vale, the woman in the wedding dress hiding bruises beneath lace, was about to become the match that burned it all down. If you want to see how far justice can reach when a monster decides to protect instead of destroy, stay until the end. Drop a like and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. 3 weeks earlier, Celine Vale woke up in her tiny apartment above Magnolia Bakery and allowed herself exactly 30 seconds apiece before the dread settled back into her chest like something living. Pale morning light filtered through cheap curtains. The smell of fresh bread drifted up through the floorboards. Her alarm hadn't gone off yet. For half a minute, she could pretend her life was just small and quiet and hers. Then she remembered. Tristan Beaumont had found her again. She sat up slowly, running trembling fingers through tangled dark hair, and stared at the engagement ring glinting on her left hand like a tiny handcuff made of diamonds. 3 carats. Platinum band. Custom engraved with words that made her stomach turn. Forever mine. Not ours. Mine. Celine closed her eyes and forced herself to breathe. In through the nose, out through the mouth. The therapist she'd seen twice before her money ran out had taught her that. Grounding techniques, coping mechanisms, ways to survive when your body remembered violence your mind tried to forget. It didn't help. Nothing helped. Because in 72 hours she was going to marry the man who had once dragged her across a marble floor by her hair, while his mother sipped champagne in the next room and pretended not to hear the screaming. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. She didn't want to look. She looked anyway. Tristan Beaumont. Morning, sweetheart. Dress fitting at 2 p.m. Don't be late, you know how mother gets. Her hand shook so badly she almost dropped the phone. There was no affection in that message, just ownership. A reminder that he could reach her anytime, anywhere, no matter how far she ran or how carefully she hid. Celine set the phone down and walked to the bathroom on legs that felt borrowed from someone braver. She turned on the shower, waited for the water to get hot, stared at her reflection in the mirror and saw a stranger staring back. Hollow eyes, sharp cheekbones, a mouth that had forgotten how to smile without flinching first. 28 years old, and she looked like a ghost. She stepped into the shower and let the water scald her skin until it hurt enough to feel real. 40 minutes later, Celine pushed through the back entrance of Moretti Holdings, wearing her best imitation of a woman who wasn't falling apart. Black slacks, white blouse, hair pulled into a neat bun, the uniform of invisible competence. She'd learned a long time ago that the quieter you made yourself, the safer you stayed. Moretti Holdings occupied the top 3 floors of a renovated shipping warehouse near Charleston Harbor. To the city, it was a legitimate import-export business. To anyone paying attention, it was the nerve center of the most powerful criminal empire on the eastern seaboard. Celine kept the books. She reconciled invoices, tracked inventory, filed reports, and asked absolutely no questions about the shipping manifests that never quite added up, or the cash deposits that appeared in accounts with names like Coastal Freight Solutions and Atlantic Marine Consulting. It paid well. The benefits were better than anything she'd ever had. And her boss, Dante Moretti himself, had never once raised his voice at her. That alone made it the best job she'd ever held. She slipped into her small office on the 2nd floor and booted up her computer. Spreadsheets filled the screen, numbers that needed reconciling, accounts that needed balancing, work that let her disappear into columns and formulas where nothing unexpected ever happened. But this morning, she couldn't focus. Her mind kept circling back to the same impossible question. How do you survive marrying a man who's already killed you once? Because that's what Tristan had done. Not literally, not with his hands or a weapon or anything the law could prosecute, but he'd killed the version of Celine who used to laugh easily and dream about the future and believe that love was supposed to feel safe. That girl died slowly over 18 months of isolation, control, and carefully calibrated cruelty disguised as devotion. By the time Celine finally ran, she was a hollow shell wearing her own face. And now she was going back. Not because she wanted to, because federal judge Harold Beaumont, Tristan's father, had made it very clear that refusing wasn't an option. Oh, but the memory arrived without permission. 5 nights ago, her apartment. The knock on the door she knew better than to answer. She'd opened it anyway. Judge Harold Beaumont stood in the hallway wearing a tailored suit and the kind of smile that belonged on men who never faced consequences. Mid-60s, silver hair, eyes like chips of blue ice. "Celine," he'd said warmly, as if they were old friends. "May I come in?" She should have slammed the door. She let him inside. He'd settled onto her second-hand couch like he owned it, looked around her tiny apartment with the detached curiosity of someone touring a zoo. "You've built a nice little life here," he said. "Quiet, simple, safe." Celine stood near the door with her arms wrapped around herself. "What do you want?" "My son misses you." Her stomach dropped. "Tristan made mistakes," the judge continued. "He knows that. We all do. But he's grown, matured. He wants a chance to make things right." "No." The word came out stronger than she expected. Judge Beaumont's smile didn't waver. "I'm afraid no isn't available to you anymore." Then he opened his briefcase and pulled out a folder thick with documents, financial records, bank transfers, emails with her signature, invoices for inventory that never existed, evidence of embezzlement, fabricated, professional, completely convincing. "Your employer, Mr. Moretti, has been very generous with his bookkeeping latitude," the judge said. "But these discrepancies are troubling. If the FBI were to receive an anonymous tip, I suspect they'd find your fingerprints all over a rather sophisticated fraud operation." Celine's legs nearly gave out. "I didn't—" "Of course you didn't." His voice was silk over steel. "But proving that would take years. Legal fees you can't afford. A trial you wouldn't survive. And by the time the truth came out, you'd already be in prison." He let that sink in. Then he pulled out a second folder. Inside was a photograph of Marisol Vega. Celine's chest seized. Marisol was 63, a former housekeeper who'd worked for the Beaumont family for 2 decades before witnessing something she wasn't supposed to see. She'd disappeared into protective obscurity under a new name, and Celine had been quietly sending her money every month for the past year, the only family Celine had left. "Sweet woman," Judge Beaumont murmured, "living in that little house in Somerville under the name Maria Delgado. Thinks she's safe." Celine couldn't breathe. "Marry my son," the judge said. "Play the role, sir. Smile for the cameras. Give us the respectability we need for the upcoming election cycle. Do that, and Marisol stays safe. Your record stays clean. Everyone wins." "And if I refuse?" Judge Beaumont stood, adjusted his cufflinks, looked at her with the cold detachment of a man who'd destroyed lives before breakfast and slept soundly afterward. "Then you'll lose everything, and Marisol will simply disappear." He left the folders on her coffee table like a signed contract. The door closed softly behind him. Celine collapsed onto the floor and sobbed until her throat bled. Oh, a knock on her office door yanked Celine back to the present. She blinked, wiped her eyes quickly. "Come in." Marco Delgado stepped inside, one of Dante's senior logistics managers. 40, built like a truck, face like weathered granite. "Boss wants to see you," Marco said. "Now." Celine's heart kicked against her ribs. "Did I do something wrong?" "Didn't say. Just said to bring you up." She stood on shaking legs and followed Marco to the elevator. They rode up in silence. 3rd floor, executive offices. Places she'd only been a handful of times. The doors opened onto polished hardwood, floor-to-ceiling windows, and the kind of furniture that cost more than her annual salary. Marco gestured toward the corner office. "He's waiting." Celine walked across the floor feeling like she was approaching a gallows. Dante Moretti's office was exactly what you'd expect from a man who controlled half of Charleston's underground economy and most of its visible one. Sleek, minimalist, powerful. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the harbor. A massive desk sat near the back. Shelves lined with leather-bound books that actually looked red. Art on the walls that probably cost 6 figures. And behind the desk sat Dante himself, 36 years old. Dark hair swept back from a face carved from Roman marble. Expensive suit tailored to fit shoulders built for violence, eyes the color of smoke and steel. He looked like old-world power wrapped in modern polish, the kind of man who never needed to raise his voice because everyone already knew what he was capable of. He looked up when Celine entered. "Close the door." She did. Her pulse hammered in her throat. Dante gestured to the chair across from him. "Sit." Celine sat. For a long moment, he just looked at her. Not the way Tristan used to look, hungry, possessive, predatory. This was different, clinical, like he was reading a book written in a language only he understood. Finally, he spoke. "You're getting married." It wasn't a question. Celine's mouth went dry. "Yes." "To Tristan Beaumont." "Yes." "The same Tristan Beaumont who put you in the hospital 3 years ago with broken ribs and a concussion." Her lungs stopped working. How did he know that? Dante leaned forward slightly. "I make it my business to know the people who work for me, Celine. Especially the ones who show up every day, do excellent work, and never cause problems. You think I didn't notice when you suddenly stopped eating lunch? When you started flinching every time someone walked up behind you? When your hand shook any time I asked you a direct question?" She couldn't speak. "I know what fear looks like," Dante continued quietly. "I know what it sounds like when someone's drowning and pretending they're fine. So when Society pages started announcing your engagement to a man who nearly killed you, I knew something was very wrong." Tears burned behind Celine's eyes. "It's not... Don't lie to me." His voice didn't rise, didn't harden, but the command in it was absolute. Celine's composure shattered. "He'll kill Marisol," she whispered. "Judge Beaumont has evidence, fake evidence. He'll put me in prison and make Marisol disappear if I don't." "I know." She froze. Dante opened a drawer and pulled out a folder, not the fabricated evidence Judge Beaumont had shown her, something else. He slid it across the desk. Celine opened it with shaking hands. Inside were photographs, financial records, sealed court documents, medical reports, names and dates going back 30 years. Evidence of a trafficking network operating through Charleston Harbor. Women who disappeared. Witnesses who died under suspicious circumstances. Court cases mysteriously dismissed. All of it connected to one name. Federal Judge Harold Beaumont. Celine looked up, her face white as bone. "How did you—" "I started digging the day your engagement was announced," Dante said. "Turns out the Beaumont family has been running one of the most sophisticated human trafficking operations on the East Coast for 3 decades. Importing women through shipping routes, falsifying documentation, using the judge's position to bury investigations and silence witnesses." Celine felt like she was falling through the floor. "Marisol didn't just witness something," Dante continued. "She saw them moving girls through the estate. Young women from overseas, no papers, no families looking for them. Judge Beaumont threatened to kill her if she talked. She ran. You've been keeping her alive ever since." Celine couldn't breathe. "This wedding isn't about love or reconciliation," Dante said. "It's about legitimacy. Judge Beaumont is planning a Senate run. His son marrying a nice, respectable woman with a tragic past she overcame gives them the perfect redemption narrative. You're a PR strategy, a human shield. The moment you're no longer useful, you'll disappear just like the others." The words landed like bullets. Celine's voice broke. "Then what do I do?" Dante stood, walked around the desk, leaned against it and looked down at her with something that might have been sympathy on a face not built for softness. "You let me handle it." "Handle what?" "Everything," Shamk. Celine left Dante's office 20 minutes later, feeling like she'd stepped into an alternate universe where gravity worked differently. He'd laid out a plan. Not a hope, not a maybe. A plan. Detailed. Methodical. Terrifying in its precision. Marisol would be moved to a secure location within 48 hours. Armed protection. New identity. Untraceable. The fabricated evidence against Celine would be systematically dismantled and traced back to its source. And the real evidence, the trafficking network, the buried crimes, the decades of corruption, would be compiled, encrypted, and prepared for strategic release. But the timing had to be perfect. Too early, and Judge Beaumont would activate contingency plans. Too late, and Celine would already be trapped. So Dante told her to do the one thing that felt impossible. Go through with the wedding. Walk down the aisle, stand at the altar, wait for the exact right moment, And then he would burn the Beaumont dynasty to ash in front of 300 witnesses. Celine had stared at him like he'd lost his mind. "You want me to marry him?" "I want you to almost marry him," Dante corrected. "There's a difference. And if something goes wrong," his eyes turned to smoke and steel, "nothing will go wrong." But the dress fitting was exactly as horrible as Celine expected. The boutique was exclusive, appointment only, the kind of place where they served champagne and treated you like royalty while dressing you for your own funeral. Tristan's mother, Caroline Beaumont, sat in a velvet chair near the mirrors, sipping sparkling wine and critiquing every detail with the surgical precision of someone who'd spent her entire life performing perfection. "The neckline is too low. The train is too long. She looks washed out in white. Try ivory." Celine stood on the platform in a dress worth more than her car and felt like a doll being prepared for display. Tristan sat beside his mother, scrolling through his phone, barely looking up. He'd changed since she'd last seen him. Leaner, sharper, like something had been filed down and polished into a weapon, but his eyes were the same, cold, entitled, empty of anything resembling remorse. When the fitting finally ended, Tristan walked her to her car. Just the two of them. His hand rested on the small of her back. To anyone watching, it looked affectionate. To Celine, it felt like a threat. "You've been quiet," Tristan said. "I'm tired." "Wedding nerves?" She forced a smile. "Something like that." They reached her car. Tristan opened the door for her, playing the gentleman. Then he leaned in close. His breath brushed her ear. "I know you don't want this," he whispered, "but you're going to smile. You're going to say your vows. You're going to play the perfect wife. And if you even think about running—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Celine got in the car, closed the door, drove away before her hands started shaking too badly to grip the wheel. That night, she sat alone in her apartment, staring at her phone. One message. Unknown number. Don't say yes. 3 words. No explanation. No name. But she knew. Dante. And for the first time in years, Celine felt something flicker inside her chest. Not hope. Not yet. Just the faint memory of what hope used to feel like. The days blurred together. Rehearsal dinner, final menu approvals, seating charts, guest lists. Celine moved through it all like a sleepwalker, smiling when required, speaking when spoken to, playing her part. But beneath the surface, something was shifting. Marisol stopped answering her regular check-in calls. At first, Celine panicked. Then she received a single text. "I'm safe. Don't worry. Trust him. No signature." But Celine knew Marisol's syntax, her phrasing, the way she always ended messages with reassurance even when she was terrified. It was real. Dante had kept his word. The morning of the wedding arrived wrapped in rain and thunder. Celine woke at dawn in a hotel suite paid for by the Beaumont family. White roses filled every surface. Champagne sat chilling in silver buckets. A team of stylists waited to transform her into the perfect bride. She stood at the window and watched rain hammer the city below. Somewhere out there, Dante was preparing. Somewhere out there, the truth was armed and waiting. Somewhere out there, an empire built on blood and silence was about to collapse. All she had to do was walk down the aisle, stand at the altar, and wait for the doors to open. The cathedral was packed. 300 guests, senators, business leaders, socialites. Cameras positioned for the perfect shots. String quartet playing softly. The scent of white roses so thick it felt suffocating. Celine stood in the bridal suite wearing a dress that cost more than most people's yearly salary and felt like a burial shroud. Bruises hidden beneath lace gloves. Fear disguised as bridal nerves. A woman about to be erased, playing the part of a fairy tale. Caroline Beaumont adjusted Celine's veil with cold precision. "You look beautiful," she said. "Tristan is a lucky man." Celine wanted to scream. Instead, she smiled. "Thank you." Music swelled, doors opened. The aisle stretched ahead like a death march, and Celine began to walk. In Chemin, every step felt like drowning. Faces blurred past. Cameras flashed. Smiles gleamed like predators circling prey. At the altar, Tristan waited. Handsome, polished, charming to everyone except the woman he'd once beaten unconscious for suggesting they eat dinner at a restaurant he didn't choose. The officiant began speaking. Words about love, about commitment, about two souls becoming one. Celine's hands shook so badly she nearly dropped her bouquet. Tristan's fingers closed around hers. Too tight, a reminder. The officiant smiled. Do you, Tristan Beaumont? The cathedral doors exploded open. Rain poured inside. Thunder cracked overhead. And every head in the sanctuary turned to see the man in the black overcoat walking down the aisle with the calm authority of someone who had never needed permission for anything in his entire life. Dante Moretti. Cold rain glistened across his shoulders. His eyes locked onto Tristan. He walked forward like judgment itself. The music died. Silence swallowed the cathedral whole. Dante stopped beside Celine, looked directly at Tristan, and spoke 5 words that shattered everything. She's not marrying you today. The silence in the cathedral lasted exactly 3 seconds. Then Judge Harold Beaumont rose from his seat in the front pew like a man preparing to deliver a verdict, his face carved from granite and fury. Who the hell do you think you are? Dante didn't look at him. His eyes stayed locked on Celine, steady and unreadable, like he was the only fixed point in a room that had just tilted sideways. Someone who keeps promises, Dante said quietly. Tristan's hand was still gripping Celine's wrist. His fingers tightened until bone ground against bone. She bit down on the inside of her cheek to keep from crying out. You need to leave, Tristan said, his voice vibrating with barely controlled rage. Now! Dante finally shifted his gaze to Tristan. The temperature in the cathedral seemed to drop 10 degrees. Let go of her! It wasn't a request. Tristan's jaw clenched. This is a private ceremony. You're trespassing. Then call the police. Dante's voice was silk over steel. I'll wait. 300 guests sat frozen in their pews, phones out, cameras recording, the entire disaster unfolding in real time across social media feeds and text message chains that were already lighting up Charleston's elite like wildfire. Judge Beaumont stepped into the aisle, his polished courtroom authority snapping into place like armor. Mr. Moretti, he said, his tone dripping with condescension. I don't know what fantasy you've constructed in your head, but this woman is here of her own free will. She agreed to marry my son. Willingly, legally. You have no right. She agreed because you threatened to kill Marisol Vega and frame her for embezzlement. The judge's expression didn't flicker, but his eyes went dead cold. That's a very serious accusation, Judge Beaumont said softly. One you'll need to prove in a court of law, and since I am the law in this city, I'd suggest you choose your next words carefully. Dante smiled. It was the kind of smile that made smart men reconsider their life choices. I don't need to prove it in your courtroom, Judge. I just need to prove it to them. He gestured to the 300 witnesses staring in horrified fascination. Then Dante pulled out his phone. Judge Beaumont's face went white. Don't. Dante's thumb hovered over the screen. Last chance, Dante said. Law, let her walk out of here right now, and maybe this stays contained. Maybe you get to keep pretending you're respectable for another few years before someone else buries you. But if you try to stop her, you'll what? Tristan snarled, finally releasing Celine's wrist and stepping forward. Ruin us? You think anyone's going to believe a 2-bit gangster over a federal judge? Dante's expression didn't change. Let's find out. He tapped the screen. For 5 seconds, nothing happened. Then every phone in the cathedral started buzzing simultaneously. Notifications erupted like fireworks, emails, text messages, file downloads, news alerts. 300 people suddenly holding 300 smoking guns aimed directly at the Beaumont family's perfectly constructed facade. A woman in the 3rd row gasped and covered her mouth. A senator in the 5th row stood up and walked straight out the side door without a word. Tristan's mother turned her phone face down on the pew and closed her eyes like she could make reality disappear through sheer willpower. Judge Beaumont's face turned from white to crimson. You son of a... Careful, Dante interrupted. There are cameras everywhere. Celine stood frozen at the altar, her mind struggling to process what was happening. Around her, the sanctuary dissolved into chaos. Whispers hissed through the pews like gas leaking before an explosion. Reporters in the back rows were already typing furiously. Photographers repositioned for better angles. The fairy tale was burning down in real time. and she was still wearing the dress. Tristan grabbed her arm and yanked her toward him so hard she stumbled. "You did this," he hissed into her face. "You let him in. You told him." Dante moved. 1 second he was standing 3 feet away. The next, his hand was wrapped around Tristan's wrist, with enough pressure to make the younger man's entire arm go rigid. "Touch her again," Dante said, his voice barely above a whisper, "and I'll break every bone in your hand before your father can finish dialing 911. Tristan tried to pull away. Dante didn't let go. "I said let go." "You first." They stood locked together, two apex predators testing each other's resolve, while 300 people watched and recorded and shared and tweeted and texted until the scandal metastasized from a private disaster into a viral phenomenon. Finally, Tristan released Celine. Dante released Tristan. But neither of them stepped back. Celine's heart hammered against her ribs so hard she thought it might crack straight through her sternum. Her breath came in short, ragged gasps that made the corset of her dress feel like it was crushing her lungs. She looked at Dante. He looked back. And in his eyes, she saw the answer to the question she'd been too afraid to ask. "This is real. You're not alone anymore." "Come on," Dante said quietly, extending his hand. Celine stared at it. That hand represented everything she'd been too terrified to reach for since the day she ran from Tristan's penthouse with blood in her hair and her ribs screaming, freedom, choice, a future that didn't end in a shallow grave. She took his hand. The moment her fingers closed around his, the cathedral exploded into shouting. Judge Beaumont roared for security. Caroline Beaumont stood up and pointed at Celine like she was something that needed to be exterminated. Tristan lunged forward, murder written across his face. Dante moved between them instantly, his free hand rising in a gesture that stopped Tristan cold. Not because of the threat, because 6 men in dark suits had materialized from the back of the cathedral and were now moving up the aisles with the coordinated precision of a military extraction team. Dante's people. Armed, professional, utterly uninterested in negotiation. "We're leaving," Dante said, his voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. "Anyone who tries to stop us will regret it." Judge Beaumont's face twisted with rage. "You can't just watch me." Dante turned, still holding Celine's hand, and began walking back down the aisle. Celine followed, her legs shaking so badly she could barely stay upright. The wedding dress dragged behind her, yards of silk and lace trailing across marble floors like a discarded skin she was finally shedding. Every step felt like walking through concrete. Cameras flashed. People shouted. Someone screamed something about calling the police. But Dante kept walking, steady and relentless, pulling Celine toward the doors and the rain and the freedom waiting beyond them. They were 10 feet from the exit when Judge Beaumont's voice rang out across the cathedral, cold and final. "Celine Vale, if you walk out that door, I will destroy you." Celine froze. Dante stopped beside her, waiting. She turned slowly, meeting the judge's eyes across the length of the cathedral. The man who had threatened Marisol. The man who had built a trafficking empire on the backs of women who had no one to protect them. The man who had turned his son into a monster and called it love. Her voice came out stronger than she expected. "You already tried." Then she turned back to Dante and kept walking. The rain hit her the moment they stepped outside. Cold. Vicious. Soaking through her dress in seconds. A black SUV idled at the curb, rear door open, engine running. Dante guided her inside, then slid in beside her. The door slammed shut. The driver hit the gas before anyone could follow. Celine sat in the back seat, shivering, dripping rainwater onto leather upholstery, staring at her hands like they belonged to someone else. She'd done it. She'd walked away. She'd chosen herself. The realization hit her like a physical blow, and suddenly she couldn't breathe. Her chest constricted, her vision tunneled, her lungs seized up like someone had wrapped steel cables around her ribs and yanked them tight. Panic attack. She knew what it was. That didn't make it stop. Dante's hand appeared in her peripheral vision, steady and unhurried. "Breathe," he said quietly. "In through your nose, 4 counts. Hold it. Out through your mouth. 4 counts. She tried. Failed. Tried again. Her breath came in jagged gasps that sounded like someone drowning on dry land. "Look at me," Dante said. She couldn't. "Celine, look at me." She forced her eyes up. He was watching her with an expression she couldn't name. Not pity, not sympathy, something harder. Something that felt like recognition. "You're safe," he said. "You're out. It's over." "It's not over," she choked out. "He's going to come after me. He's going to spend the next 6 months trying to explain why his family's name is attached to a trafficking network that's been operating for 30 years. He doesn't have time to come after you. You don't know him." "I know men like him." Dante's voice was quiet, certain. Rich, entitled, used to buying their way out of consequences. But here's what they don't understand. Money can't fix what I just did to his reputation. Lawyers can't undo 300 witnesses watching his empire collapse in real time. He's finished, and he knows it. Celine wanted to believe him. But fear was a living thing inside her chest, clawing at her lungs, whispering that safety was an illusion and freedom was a trap, and any second now, someone would drag her back to the cathedral and force her to finish what she started. The SUV turned onto a private road. Trees closed in on both sides, blocking out the city. They drove for another 10 minutes before pulling up to a wrought iron gate that opened automatically. Beyond it sat a house. No, an estate. 3 stories of stone and glass perched on a hill overlooking Charleston Harbor, surrounded by trees and high walls and enough security cameras to make a government building jealous. The SUV stopped in front of the main entrance. Dante got out first, then extended his hand to help Celine. She stepped out onto gravel, still wearing her wedding dress, still shaking, still half convinced this was some kind of fever dream her mind had constructed to cope with marrying Tristan. But the rain was real, the cold was real, and Dante Moretti standing beside her in a soaked overcoat, looking at her like she was something worth protecting instead of something to be owned. That felt real too. "Come inside," he said. "You need dry clothes and about 12 hours of sleep." "I don't," Celine's voice cracked. "I don't have anywhere else to go." "I know, that's why you're staying here." "I can't just—" "You can. You will. End of discussion." He walked toward the entrance. Celine followed because she didn't know what else to do. The inside of Dante's estate was nothing like she expected. She'd imagined something cold, sterile, the kind of minimalist luxury that felt more like a museum than a home. Instead, she walked into warmth. Hardwood floors, thick rugs, furniture that looked lived in, bookshelves crammed with volumes that showed actual wear, art on the walls that didn't scream investment piece. A home, not a showroom. Dante shrugged out of his wet coat and draped it over a chair. "Second floor," he said. "Third door on the right. There's a guest room with a bathroom, towels in the closet, clothes in the dresser, probably too big, but they're clean." Celine just stood there, dripping rainwater onto expensive hardwood, her mind still trying to catch up with the last 30 minutes. Dante looked at her, really looked. Not the way Tristan used to, cataloging flaws, calculating ownership. This was different. "You're in shock," he said. "It's normal. Go upstairs. Get warm. We'll talk when you're ready." "Why are you doing this?" The question came out before she could stop it. Dante's expression didn't change. "Because someone should have done it years ago." "You don't even know me." "I know enough." "I'm not—" She struggled to find words. "I'm not worth all this. I'm just a bookkeeper. I'm nobody." "You're not nobody," Dante said quietly. "You're someone who survived 18 months of hell and still showed up to work every day with a smile. You're someone who spent a year protecting a woman you barely knew because it was the right thing to do. You're someone who was willing to marry a monster to save someone else's life." He stepped closer, not threatening, just present. "So don't tell me you're nobody, Celine. The only people who think you're nobody are the ones who need you to believe that so they can keep hurting you." Her throat closed up. She wanted to say something. "Thank you. I don't understand. Why do you care?" But all that came out was a broken sob. Dante didn't try to comfort her, didn't offer empty platitudes. He just waited. And somehow, that was exactly what she needed. When she finally got herself under control, she wiped her eyes and nodded. "Second floor. Third door on the right." "Yeah?" She walked toward the stairs on legs that felt like they might give out any second. Halfway up, she stopped and looked back. Dante was still standing in the foyer, soaked and dangerous and somehow the safest thing in her entire world right now. "Thank you," she whispered. He nodded once. She kept climbing. Meb. The guest room was bigger than her entire apartment. King-size bed, sitting area, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the harbor, an ensuite bathroom with a shower that could fit 4 people. Celine stood in the middle of it all and felt like she'd walked into someone else's life. She peeled off the wet wedding dress with shaking hands. The fabric clung to her skin like it didn't want to let go. When it finally pooled at her feet, she kicked it into the corner and stood there in her underwear, staring at the bruises Tristan's grip had left on her wrist. Purple fingerprints, a constellation of violence. She'd gotten so good at hiding them. Makeup, long sleeves, careful positioning. Now she didn't have to. The shower was scalding. She stood under the spray until her skin turned red and her muscles stopped shaking and the cold fear lodged in her chest finally started to thaw. When she got out, she found clothes laid out on the bed. Sweatpants, a t-shirt, both about 3 sizes too big. She put them on anyway. Then she sat on the edge of the bed and stared at her phone. 73 missed calls, 216 text messages, voicemails flooding in faster than she could delete them. Most from numbers she didn't recognize, some from numbers she did. She scrolled through the messages with numb fascination. Tristan, you're making the biggest mistake of your life. Tristan, this isn't over. Tristan, you think he cares about you? He's using you. Unknown. I know where you are. Unknown. You can't hide forever. Her hands started shaking again. She turned the phone off and threw it across the room. Then she crawled under the covers and closed her eyes and tried to pretend that everything was going to be okay. She almost believed it. When Celine woke up, the room was dark, and her head felt like it had been stuffed with cotton. She checked the clock on the nightstand. 11:47 p.m. She'd slept for 9 hours straight. Her stomach growled. She couldn't remember the last time she'd eaten. Celine climbed out of bed, pulled on the oversized sweatshirt hanging on a chair, and padded downstairs in bare feet. The house was quiet. Not empty quiet. Lived-in quiet. The kind of silence that felt safe instead of suffocating. She followed the faint glow of light toward the back of the house and found herself in a kitchen that looked like it had been ripped straight out of an architectural magazine. Marble countertops, professional-grade appliances, an island big enough to prep Thanksgiving dinner for 20 people, and sitting at that island, nursing a glass of whiskey and reading something on his phone, was Dante. He looked up when she entered. "You're awake." "I didn't mean to sleep that long." "You needed it." He gestured to the fridge. "There's food. Help yourself." Celine opened the fridge and found it stocked with actual groceries. Not takeout containers, not meal prep services. Real food. She pulled out ingredients and started making a sandwich because her hands needed something to do. Dante watched her in silence. It should have felt uncomfortable. It didn't. "Your phone's been ringing," he said eventually. "I turned it off." Smart. She finished making the sandwich and sat down at the island across from him. For a while, they just existed in the same space without speaking. Then Dante said, "The videos are everywhere." Celine looked up sharply. "What?" "The cathedral. Every major news outlet picked it up. Social media's on fire. Judge Beaumont's being called before a federal ethics committee. 3 separate investigations have been opened into the trafficking allegations. Tristan's law firm put him on indefinite leave." He slid his phone across the counter. Celine looked at the screen. Video footage of the cathedral. Her standing at the altar. Dante walking down the aisle. The moment everything collapsed. The headline read, "Federal Judge's Son's Wedding Descends into Chaos Amid Trafficking Allegations." Below it, thousands of comments. Some supportive, some vicious, some calling her a gold digger who got cold feet, others calling her brave. Celine pushed the phone back. "I can't look at that right now." "You don't have to. I just wanted you to know what's happening." She took a bite of her sandwich and chewed mechanically. "What happens now?" "Now?" Dante leaned back in his chair. "Now we wait. Let the investigators do their job. Let the media tear the Beaumonts apart. Let the system, for once, actually work the way it's supposed to. And me? You stay here. Stay safe. Figure out what you want your life to look like when this is over. I don't even know where to start. Start with breathing. Everything else comes after." Celine looked at him, really looked, and saw exhaustion carved into the lines of his face. "You didn't have to do this," she said quietly. "Any of this. You could have just fired me and stayed out of it." Dante's jaw tightened. "No," he said. "I couldn't." "Why not?" He didn't answer right away. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough. "Because I know what it's like to be trapped. I know what it feels like when nobody's coming to save you. And I spent too many years wishing someone had cared enough to intervene before I became—" He stopped, looked away. "Before you became what?" Celine pressed. "Someone who had to save himself the hard way." The weight in those words settled over the kitchen like fog. Celine wanted to ask more. Wanted to understand the man who had walked into a cathedral and shattered an empire for a woman he barely knew, but she could see the walls going up behind his eyes. So instead, she just said, "Thank you." Dante nodded. They sat in silence until Celine finished her sandwich. Then she stood. "I should let you sleep." "I don't sleep much." "Neither do I." He smiled faintly. "Then I guess we're well matched." Celine walked toward the stairs, then paused. "Dante?" "Yeah? What you said earlier about me not being nobody. Did you mean that?" He looked at her with those smoke and steel eyes that seemed to see straight through every defense she'd ever built. "Every word." She nodded and headed upstairs. But as she climbed the steps, she felt something shift inside her chest. Not hope. Not yet. But maybe the foundation hope could build on. The next 3 days passed in a strange kind of limbo. Celine stayed at the estate. Ate meals she didn't have to cook, wore clothes that didn't carry the weight of someone else's expectations, walked through rooms where nobody yelled or broke things, or made her feel like she was taking up too much space just by existing. It felt surreal. Dante worked from home most days, disappearing into his office for hours at a time to handle whatever empire management a man like him required. But every evening, they ended up in the kitchen, talking, or not talking, just existing in the same space without performance or pretense. Celine learned things about him in those quiet hours. He'd grown up in Brooklyn, parents dead before he turned 18, raised himself and his younger sister through sheer force of will and a willingness to do whatever it took to survive. The sister, Sophia, was married now, living in Boston, 2 kids, a life far removed from the world Dante operated in. He sent her money every month, paid for the kids' private school, made sure she never had to worry about anything, but he never visited. "Why not?" Celine asked one night. Dante stared into his whiskey glass. "Because she built a life that doesn't include me, and I'm not going to drag my world into hers." "She's your sister." "Exactly, which is why I stay away." Celine understood that. The kind of love that protected by keeping distance. She'd done the same thing with Marisol. On the 4th day, Dante's lawyer arrived. A sharp woman in her 50s named Patricia Reeves, who carried a briefcase that probably cost more than Celine's car and exuded the kind of confidence that came from winning cases other people thought were unwinnable. They sat in Dante's office while Patricia laid out the situation in clinical detail. The fabricated embezzlement evidence had been traced back to a forensic accountant on Judge Beaumont's payroll. The charges were being dismissed. The trafficking investigation was expanding. Federal prosecutors were building a case. Multiple witnesses were coming forward. Judge Beaumont's judicial career was over. Tristan's law license was under review. The Beaumont empire was collapsing in real time. Patricia looked at Celine over the top of her reading glasses. "You're going to be subpoenaed," she said, "probably within the next 2 weeks. They'll want your testimony about the coercion, the threats, everything Judge Beaumont said and did." Celine's stomach dropped. "I have to testify?" "You don't have to, but it would help. And more importantly, it would protect you. If you're an active witness in a federal investigation, the Beaumonts won't be able to touch you without it looking like retaliation." "What if I say no?" Patricia's expression didn't change. "Then you spend the next few years looking over your shoulder, waiting for them to come after you some other way." Celine looked at Dante. He was watching her carefully. "Your choice," he said. "Whatever you decide, I'll back you." She wanted to say no, wanted to disappear into a quiet life where nobody knew her name and nothing was expected of her. But she thought about Marisol, about the women whose names appeared in those trafficking files, about every person the Beaumonts had hurt because nobody stood up and said enough. "I'll testify," Celine said. Patricia nodded. "Good. I'll coordinate with the prosecutors." She packed up her briefcase and left. The office felt colder without her. Celine sat in the chair across from Dante's desk, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I don't know if I can do this," she whispered. "Yes, you can. You don't know that. I watched you walk away from a man who terrorized you for years. I watched you stand in that cathedral and choose yourself. If you can do that, you can do anything." Celine wanted to believe him, but doubt was a familiar weight. That night she couldn't sleep. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, her mind replaying every moment from the cathedral on an endless loop. Finally, she gave up and went downstairs. The house was dark except for a light coming from Dante's office. She stood outside the door, hesitating. Then she knocked. "Come in." She pushed the door open. Dante sat behind his desk, surrounded by files and documents, looking like he hadn't slept in days. "Can't sleep?" he asked. "No. Join the club." Celine stepped inside and closed the door behind her. "Can I ask you something?" "Always." "Why does this matter so much to you? Really? I know what you said before, but—" She struggled to find words. "You barely know me. You've turned your entire life upside down for someone you barely know. Why?" Dante leaned back in his chair, studying her. For a long time, he didn't answer. Then he said, "My mother." Celine waited. "She was like you," Dante continued quietly. "Trapped, scared, married to a man who hurt her every chance he got. And I watched her disappear a little more every day until there was nothing left of the woman she used to be." His voice was flat, emotionless. But his eyes told a different story. "I was 16 when she finally tried to leave, packed a bag, took me and Sophia, made it halfway to the bus station before he found us." Celine's chest tightened. He beat her so badly she couldn't walk for 3 weeks, and when she healed, she never tried again, just gave up, stayed, survived, until she didn't anymore. How did she— Heart attack, 43 years old, stress, fear, a lifetime of abuse her body couldn't carry anymore. The words landed like stones dropping into still water. "I was 19, Dante said. Old enough to have stopped it, old enough to have killed him myself. But I didn't. I just watched, and she died thinking nobody cared enough to save her." Celine's throat burned. "So when I see someone trapped the way she was," Dante continued, "I don't have a choice. I can't walk away. Because every time I do, I see her face." He looked at Celine. "You're not her, and I'm not that scared kid anymore, so this time, I'm doing something about it." Celine didn't realize she was crying until tears dripped onto her hands. She crossed the room without thinking, stood beside his desk. And before she could second-guess herself, she reached out and took his hand. His fingers closed around hers. Warm, solid, real. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Don't be. Just survive. That's enough." They stood there at the quiet office, holding on to each other like lifelines, while the city slept outside and empires crumbled, and somewhere in the darkness, freedom waited just beyond reach. The next morning, Celine woke to the sound of shouting downstairs. She bolted upright, heart hammering, fear spiking through her veins like ice water. She threw on a sweatshirt and ran downstairs. The front door was open. Dante stood in the doorway, blocking someone from entering. Celine stopped halfway down the stairs. The voice on the other side of the door was achingly familiar. "I know she's here. I just want to talk to her." "Tristan." Celine's entire body went rigid. "She doesn't want to talk to you," Dante said, his voice deadly calm. "You don't get to speak for her." "Actually, I do. This is my property. You're trespassing. Leave before I make you leave." "I'm not going anywhere until I see her." "Then you're going to be very disappointed." Tristan's voice rose. "Celine, I know you can hear me. Just come down here for 5 minutes, please. I need to explain." "There's nothing to explain," Dante interrupted. "She's done with you. Accept it and move on." "This is between me and her." "Not anymore." Celine's hands gripped the stair railing so hard her knuckles turned white. Part of her wanted to run back upstairs. Part of her wanted to scream. But another part, a part she didn't recognize until that moment, wanted to walk down those stairs and look Tristan in the eye and tell him exactly what she thought of him. So she did. She walked down the stairs, crossed the foyer, stopped beside Dante. Tristan stood on the front steps, looking like he hadn't slept in days. His suit was wrinkled, his eyes were bloodshot, his jaw was clenched so tight she could see the muscles jumping. When he saw her, something cracked across his face. "Celine, thank God. I've been trying to reach you. I know." "Then why didn't you answer?" "Because I didn't want to talk to you. We need to fix this." "There's nothing to fix, Tristan. It's over." "It's not over. We can work through this. My father made mistakes, but that doesn't mean your father built a trafficking empire and threatened to kill Marisol if I didn't marry you." Tristan flinched. "That's not... He wouldn't..." "He did. And you knew." "I didn't know about the trafficking. But you knew about Marisol. You knew about the fabricated evidence. You knew I was being forced, and you didn't care." "I cared," Tristan said, his voice breaking. "I love you, Celine. I've always loved you. I made mistakes. I know that. But we can fix this. We can start over. Clean slate. I'll get help. Therapy. Whatever you need. What I need is for you to leave me alone." "You don't mean that." "I've never meant anything more in my life." Tristan's expression darkened. "Is it because of him?" He jerked his chin toward Dante. "You think he's better than me? You think he actually cares about you? He's using you, Celine. This whole thing is just a power play. He doesn't give a damn about—" "Stop talking." Dante's voice cut through the air like a blade. Tristan's mouth snapped shut. "She told you to leave," Dante said quietly. "That's all you need to hear. Now get off my property before I have you arrested for harassment." "You can't." "I can. And I will." Tristan looked at Celine one last time. His eyes were desperate, broken, almost human. Almost. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "For everything. I'm so sorry." Celine felt nothing. No anger, no pity, no satisfaction, just emptiness where he used to live inside her head. "Goodbye, Tristan." She turned and walked back into the house. Dante closed the door, locked it. When she looked at him, his expression was unreadable. "You okay?" "I don't know," Celine admitted. "Ask me in an hour." "Fair enough." They stood in the foyer while her heart rate slowly returned to normal. Then Dante's phone rang. He answered it, listened for 30 seconds, and his face went completely blank. "When?" he asked. A pause. "Where is she now?" Another pause. "Send me the address. I'm on my way." He hung up and looked at Celine. "What's wrong?" she asked. "Marisol's safe house was compromised. Someone found her." Selena's blood turned to ice. "Is she—" "She's alive. My men got her out before anything happened, but whoever found her knew exactly where to look." "The Beaumonts." "Probably." Celine's hand started shaking. "Where is she now?" "Being moved to a secondary location. But Celine—" He stopped. "What?" "This means they're not backing down. They're escalating, which means you're not safe here anymore either." The words hit her like a freight train. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying we need to move. Tonight. Somewhere they can't find you. Somewhere off the grid." "For how long?" Dante's jaw tightened. "Until this is over." And just like that, the fragile piece Celine had started to build shattered into 1,000 pieces. Because safety, she was learning, was never permanent. It was something you had to fight for. Every single day. They left within the hour. Celine threw clothes into a duffel bag with shaking hands while Dante made calls downstairs, his voice low and clipped, issuing orders to people whose names she'd never know. The safe house wasn't safe anymore. The estate wasn't safe anymore. Nowhere was safe. She zipped the bag closed and stared at her reflection in the mirror, dark circles under her eyes. Hair she hadn't bothered styling. The face of a woman who'd spent 4 days thinking she might actually survive this, only to discover that survival was just another word for Yanchi. Yanchi, the inevitable. Dante appeared in the doorway. "Ready?" "No." "Yeah." They took the back exit. A different SUV, a different driver. Same rigid silence that felt like holding your breath underwater. The city blurred past the windows. Charleston's historic streets gave way to industrial districts, then highways, Then nothing but darkness and trees pressing in from both sides. Celine didn't ask where they were going. She wasn't sure she wanted to know. After 90 minutes, they turned onto a dirt road that looked like it had been abandoned sometime in the last decade. The SUV bounced over ruts and potholes until finally pulling up to a cabin that appeared out of the darkness like something from a nightmare dressed as refuge. One story. Wood siding. Windows covered with shutters. Surrounded by trees so dense they swallowed the moonlight whole. "This is it?" Celine asked. "This is it," Dante confirmed. They got out. The air smelled like pine and damp earth and isolation. Inside, the cabin was sparse but functional. One bedroom. A bathroom with plumbing that groaned. A kitchen with a propane stove and a refrigerator stocked with enough food for 2 weeks. A living area with furniture that had seen better decades. No television, no internet. Just a landline phone mounted on the wall and a stack of old paperbacks on a shelf that looked like they'd been read to death and resurrected multiple times. Dante checked the perimeter while Celine stood in the middle of the living room, feeling like she'd been dropped into someone else's life. When he came back inside, he locked the door behind him and engaged 3 separate deadbolts. "Marisol's being moved to a location in North Carolina," he said. "Different team, different route. They won't make the same mistake twice." "How did they find her the first time?" "I don't know yet, but I will." He said it with the kind of certainty that should have been reassuring. Instead, it just made Celine's stomach turn. Because if Dante Moretti, a man who controlled half of Charleston's criminal infrastructure, didn't know how his own safe house had been compromised, then they were dealing with something bigger than either of them had anticipated. Celine sank onto the couch. "How long do we stay here?" "Until I figure out who leaked Marisol's location and plug the hole." "And if you can't?" Dante's jaw tightened. "I will." But for the first time since she'd met him, Celine heard something in his voice that sounded almost like doubt. The first night in the cabin, neither of them slept. Celine lay in the bedroom staring at ceiling beams while her mind spun through every possible worst-case scenario like a horror film on repeat. Marisol captured, tortured, killed, all because Celine had dared to walk away from Tristan Beaumont. Around 3 in the morning, she gave up and went to the living room. Dante sat at the small kitchen table, laptop open, documents spread across the surface like crime scene evidence. He looked up when she entered. "Can't sleep? Can you?" "Not really." Celine sat down across from him and looked at the documents. Financial records, shipping manifests, encrypted communications, surveillance photos. The architecture of the Beaumont Empire laid bare. "What are you looking for?" she asked. "Whoever told them where Marisol was." "You think it's someone on your team?" "I think it's the only explanation that makes sense. The safe house location was need to know. 6 people had that information. 5 of them have been with me for over a decade. The 6th..." He stopped. "What?" "The 6th is Marco Delgado." Celine's stomach dropped. Marco. The logistics manager who'd brought her to Dante's office 4 days ago. The man who'd been handling Marisol's relocation. "You think Marco sold you out?" "I think Marco's sister died in a trafficking operation 3 years ago. And I think Judge Beaumont personally sealed the investigation that could have saved her." The implications hit Celine like a freight train. "So Marco's working with the Beaumonts? Or against them?" Dante leaned back in his chair. "Revenge makes people unpredictable. If Marco blames me for not protecting his sister, he might be sabotaging this whole operation to watch everyone burn." "Jesus Christ." "Yeah." Celine's hands trembled. "So what do we do?" "I'm pulling Marco's financial records, phone logs, security footage. If he's the leak, I'll find proof. And then?" Dante's expression went cold. "Then I handle it." The way he said handle made Celine's blood run ice cold. She didn't ask what that meant. She didn't want to know. The next morning, Dante's phone rang. He answered it on the second ring, listened for 30 seconds, and his entire body went rigid. "When?" he asked, his voice flat. A pause. "Where's the body?" Celine's heart stopped. Dante hung up and stared at the table like he was looking through it into some abyss only he could see. "What happened?" Celine whispered. Marco's dead. The room tilted sideways. What? His car went off a bridge last night. Cops are calling it an accident, but the brake lines were cut. The Beaumonts? Maybe. Or maybe someone else wanted him dead before he could talk. Celine's mind reeled. If Marco was the leak and now Marco was dead, that meant either the Beaumonts had eliminated their asset or there was someone else in play that neither of them had seen coming. Dante stood abruptly, grabbed his phone, and started making calls. Celine sat frozen at the table, listening to him tear through his organization with the precision of a surgeon excising cancer. Lockdowns, audits, background checks, every person with access to sensitive information suddenly under a microscope. When he finally hung up, he looked 10 years older. "We're moving again," he said. "Where?" "I don't know yet. Somewhere no one in my organization knows about. Somewhere I can control every variable." "Dante, pack your bag. We leave in 20 minutes." "Dante, stop." He looked at her, really looked, and Celine saw something in his eyes she'd never seen before. Fear. Not for himself, for her. "This is bigger than I thought," he said quietly. "Marco's dead. Marisol was nearly taken. Someone systematically dismantling every protection I put in place. And I don't know who it is or how deep this goes. So we run? So we survive." Celine stood, crossed the small room, and stopped directly in front of him. "I didn't walk away from Tristan just to spend the rest of my life hiding. You walked away so you could have a life. Period. That's all that matters." "No." Her voice shook but held firm. "What matters is stopping them, really stopping them. Not just surviving, not just hiding, actually making sure they can't hurt anyone else ever again. That's what the federal investigation is for." "And how's that going?" Celine shot back. "Marco's dead. Marisol's on the run. I'm hiding in a cabin in the middle of nowhere. Meanwhile, Judge Beaumont is probably sitting in his mansion with a scotch planning his next move. You think an ethics committee is going to stop him?" Dante's jaw clenched. "What do you want me to do, Celine? Walk into his house and put a bullet in his head? Because I can do that. I've done worse for less. But that doesn't fix anything. It just makes me the monster instead of him. I'm not asking you to kill anyone. I'm asking you to finish what you started. I am finishing it by keeping you alive." "That's not enough." They stared at each other across 3 feet of space that felt like a chasm. Finally, Dante exhaled slowly. "What do you want?" "I want to testify. I want to tell the truth. I want every single person who's ever been hurt by that family to see justice actually happen. And I want to do it publicly enough that they can't make me disappear without the entire world watching." "That's insane." "Probably. They'll come after you harder than ever." "Let them. At least I'll be fighting back instead of just running." Dante ran a hand through his hair, frustration radiating off him like heat. "You don't know what you're asking." "Yes, I do. I'm asking you to trust me." "I do trust you. I don't trust the world not to destroy you." "Then help me make sure it doesn't." Before Dante could respond, the landline phone mounted on the wall started ringing. They both froze. No one should have that number. No one even knew they were here. Dante walked over slowly, lifted the receiver, and held it to his ear without speaking. Celine watched his face drain of color. "How did you get this number?" Dante asked, his voice deadly quiet. A pause. "Prove it." Another pause. Then Dante's entire expression shattered. He hung up the phone and stood there like he'd been turned to stone. "Dante?" Celine's voice came out barely above a whisper. "Who was that?" He didn't answer immediately. When he finally spoke, his voice was hollow. "Patricia Reeves, Celine's lawyer. The woman who'd sat in Dante's office 3 days ago and laid out the case against the Beaumonts with surgical precision." "What did she want?" Dante turned slowly, and the look on his face made Celine's blood turn to ice. "She wanted to let me know that the federal investigation has been suspended pending review of new evidence." "What new evidence?" "Evidence suggesting that I fabricated the trafficking documents, that I planted false information to frame Judge Beaumont as part of a personal vendetta, that everything I gave the prosecutors was manufactured." The cabin walls closed in. "That's impossible. Patricia said they have forensic analysis showing the documents were created within the last 6 months using software traced back to one of my shell companies. They have testimony from 3 people claiming I paid them to lie about witnessing trafficking activities. They have bank transfers showing me moving money to offshore accounts connected to the same routes I accused Beaumont of using. Celine couldn't breathe. Someone set you up. Someone did more than set me up. Dante's voice was raw. Someone built a perfect frame. Every piece of evidence I compiled, every witness I protected, every document I thought would bury the Beaumonts, it's all being used to bury me instead. But you didn't. Of course I didn't, but that doesn't matter. What matters is that I can't prove I didn't. Not fast enough. Not convincingly enough. Whoever did this knew exactly how to make it look real. Celine's legs gave out. She collapsed onto the couch, her mind spinning through implications faster than she could process them. If the federal investigation was suspended, that meant the Beaumonts were no longer under scrutiny. It meant Judge Beaumont would face no consequences. It meant Tristan would walk away clean. And it meant Dante, the man who destroyed his own safety to protect her, was now facing federal charges for the very crimes he'd tried to expose. "Who could do this?" she whispered. "Someone with access to my system, someone who knew exactly what evidence I'd compiled and how to discredit it. Someone who—" He stopped, went completely still. "What?" Celine demanded. Patricia knew the cabin's phone number. "So?" "I never told her. This location isn't in any system. It's off every grid. The only people who know about it are me and the driver who brought us here." Celine's chest constricted. "You think Patricia—" "I think Patricia Reeves has been working for Judge Beaumont from the beginning." The words detonated in the space between them. Celine tried to process it, tried to make sense of how the woman who'd sat across from her and promised protection and justice and safety could have been the architect of their destruction the entire time. "She had access to everything," Dante said, his voice distant. "Every document I compiled, every piece of evidence, every witness statement. She was the one coordinating with federal prosecutors, which means she was also the one feeding information back to Beaumont, telling him exactly how to dismantle the case from the inside." "Why would she— Money, power, leverage. Does it matter?" Dante's hands clenched into fists. "She played us. Both of us. And now Beaumont has everything he needs to not only walk away clean, but to destroy me in the process." Celine stood on shaking legs. "So what do we do?" "We?" Dante laughed, but there was no humor in it. "There's no we anymore, Celine. I'm compromised. Everything I touch turns radioactive. The best thing I can do for you now is disappear and hope they're satisfied with destroying me and leave you alone." "No." "Yes." "Dante, you think they won't come after you next? You think being associated with me won't make you a target? I can't protect you anymore. I can barely protect myself. I don't need you to protect me. I need you to fight. There's nothing left to fight with." "There's us." Dante stared at her like she'd lost her mind. Maybe she had. But Celine was done running, done hiding, done letting powerful men destroy lives and walk away untouched. "Patricia has the evidence," Celine said, her voice gaining strength. "She has access to the federal prosecutors. She knows every move we've made. Fine. That means she also knows we're not going to stop." "Celine, you said someone had to testify. Someone had to go on record. So I will. I'll walk into that federal building myself. I'll tell them everything Judge Beaumont did, everything Tristan did, everything Patricia helped cover up. And I'll do it publicly enough that killing me would be worse for them than letting me talk. They'll destroy your credibility before you finish your first sentence." "Let them try." Dante stepped closer, his face inches from hers. "You don't understand what you're up against. These aren't street criminals. These are people who've spent decades perfecting the art of making problems disappear. They will eviscerate you. They will paint you as mentally unstable, desperate, vindictive. They'll drag every mistake you've ever made into the light and use it to prove you're lying. And when they're done, no one will believe a word you say." "Maybe you're right." Celine's eyes burned. "Maybe they will destroy me. Maybe I'll end up exactly where they want me, discredited, broken, erased. But at least I'll have tried. At least I'll have stood up and said the truth out loud. That's more than anyone else has done. It's not worth dying for." "Yes, it is." They stood locked in place, 2 people on opposite sides of an impossible decision, while the cabin walls pressed in and the world outside waited to devour them. Finally, Dante's phone buzzed. He looked at the screen. Whatever he saw there made his face go ashen. "What now?" Celine whispered. Dante turned the phone toward her. A text message from an unknown number. A photograph. Marisol, bound to a chair, gagged, blood running down the side of her face. And standing behind her, holding a gun to her temple, was someone Celine recognized instantly from the society pages and campaign photos she'd studied obsessively during her 18 months with Tristan. Caroline Beaumont, Tristan's mother. The woman who'd sipped champagne while her son beat Celine unconscious. The woman who'd planned every detail of the wedding that wasn't. The woman who'd sat in that boutique critiquing dress fittings while orchestrating the destruction of everything Celine had tried to build. Below the photo, a single line of text. "You have 2 hours to turn yourself over. Come alone, or she dies." Address attached. Celine's hands shook so badly she nearly dropped the phone. "It's a trap," Dante said immediately. "I know. They'll kill you both. Probably. Then you're not going." Celine looked up at him with eyes that had gone completely cold. "Yes, I am." "Celine, that's Marisol, the only family I have left. The woman who raised me when no one else gave a damn. I'm not leaving her to die. And I'm not letting you walk into your own execution." "You don't get a vote." She grabbed her jacket off the back of the chair. Dante moved to block the door. "Get out of my way," Celine said quietly. "No." "Dante, move. Make me." They stared at each other across 3 feet of space that felt like the edge of the world. Celine's voice dropped to a whisper. "Please." Something cracked in Dante's expression. "If you go alone, you die. That's not negotiable. They're not interested in negotiation. They're interested in erasing every loose end, and you're the biggest one they have. So come with me. If I come with you, they'll know. They'll be watching. The second they see me, they'll kill Marisol just to prove a point." "Then what do we do?" Dante was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something that made Selina's blood run cold. "We give them exactly what they want." 1 hour and 43 minutes later, Celine stood alone in an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of Charleston with her hands raised and her heart hammering against her ribs like something trying to escape. The address in the text had led her here. A massive industrial space that smelled like rust and motor oil and decades of neglect. Loading docks lined one wall. Broken windows let in pale moonlight. Metal scaffolding disappeared into shadows overhead. And in the center of the concrete floor, tied to a chair beneath a single bare bulb, sat Marisol. Her face was bruised, her clothes were torn, but her eyes were still fierce, still alive, still fighting. Caroline Beaumont stood behind her, immaculate in a cream-colored suit that probably cost more than Celine's entire wardrobe, holding a gun with the casual comfort of someone who'd done this before. Beside her stood Judge Harold Beaumont, looking exactly as composed as he had in Celine's apartment 2 weeks ago when he'd delivered ultimatums disguised as choices. And leaning against a support beam 10 feet away, arms crossed, face carved from stone, stood Tristan. No one else. Just the 4 of them. Family. Celine stopped 20 feet away. "Let her go," she said. "Not yet," Judge Beaumont replied. "First, we're going to have a conversation. There's nothing to talk about." "Oh, I disagree. I think there's quite a bit to discuss, such as why you chose to humiliate my family in front of 300 witnesses, why you conspired with a known criminal to fabricate evidence against me, why you've spent the last week hiding like a coward instead of accepting the consequences of your actions." Celine's hands clenched into fists. "The only thing I'm guilty of is walking away from your psychopath son." Tristan pushed off the beam. "Careful, Celine." "Or what? You'll hit me again? Break another rib? Drag me across another floor?" "I never wanted to hurt you." "You didn't want to stop either." Tristan's face twisted. Caroline clicked her tongue like she was scolding a child. "This is precisely the problem," she said. "You never knew your place. You never understood that people like us don't answer to people like you. We are the system. We are the law. We are the ones who decide who gets punished and who gets protected." "Not anymore," Celine said. "Oh, sweetheart." Caroline's smile was razor sharp. "You really believe that, don't you? You think because you made a scene at a wedding and got some trashy news coverage that anything has actually changed. But here's what you don't understand. Nothing has changed. The investigation is closed. The evidence is discredited, and in about 6 months, my husband will be sitting in the Senate while you're a footnote in a trashy tell-all book no one remembers. The investigation isn't closed. Yes, it is. Our very competent attorney made sure of that. Patricia Reeves, Celine said. Smart girl. Patricia has been on our payroll for 8 years. Every shred of evidence your boyfriend compiled went straight through her to us. Every witness he thought he was protecting was actually being monitored. Every move he made, we knew about before he made it. Dante Moretti thought he was so clever. Turns out he was just another arrogant criminal who underestimated his enemies. Celine's throat burned. So what now? You kill me and Marisol? Make us disappear like all the others? We were planning to, Judge Beaumont admitted. But then I realized something. Dead martyrs are inconvenient. They generate sympathy, conspiracy theories, ongoing investigations. It's messy. He stepped closer. But discredited lunatics? Women who accuse upstanding citizens of horrific crimes and then recant when they realize they were manipulated by violent criminals. Those women fade away quietly, especially when they're so traumatized and ashamed that they never speak about it again. Celine's stomach dropped. You want me to recant? I want you to go on record stating that everything you said about my family was false, that Dante Moretti coerced you, threatened you, fabricated evidence, and convinced you to play along. You'll testify that you were never in danger, never abused, that you walked away from the wedding due to cold feet and manipulation, not coercion. And if I refuse, Judge Beaumont gestured to Marisol, then she dies. Slowly, painfully, and you get to watch before you join her. Marisol's eyes met Celine's across the warehouse floor, and in that look, Celine saw everything she needed to know. Don't do it. Don't you dare give them what they want. Let me go. Save yourself. But Celine had spent her entire life being told she didn't matter, that she was disposable, that survival meant accepting whatever scraps powerful people decided to throw her way. She was done accepting. Okay, Celine said quietly. Judge Beaumont smiled. I knew you'd see reason. I'll recant everything. I'll testify that Dante coerced me. I'll say whatever you want. Good girl. On one condition, the smile faltered. You're not in a position to make demands. Neither are you. Caroline's grip on the gun tightened. Explain. Celine reached slowly into her jacket pocket and pulled out her phone. 3 sets of eyes locked onto it instantly. For the last hour, Celine said, this phone has been live streaming everything happening in this warehouse to a private server. Every word you've said, every threat you've made, every admission of guilt. It's all recorded. And if anything happens to me or Marisol, that recording gets sent to every major news outlet, every federal prosecutor, and every social media platform simultaneously. Dead silence. Then Caroline laughed. You're bluffing. Try me. Judge Beaumont's face went white. You're lying. Dante set this up. Dante doesn't even know I'm here. I did this myself, which means you can't trace it, can't stop it, can't make it disappear. She wasn't lying. Before leaving the cabin, Celine had set up a dead man's switch. Dante had tried to stop her, tried to convince her it was suicide, but she'd done it anyway. Because she was tired of being powerless, tired of watching monsters win, tired of surviving when what she really wanted was to live. Tristan moved toward her. Give me the phone. Come any closer and I drop it. The second it hits the ground, the failsafe triggers and everything uploads automatically. He froze. Judge Beaumont's hands trembled. What do you want? I want you to let Marisol go. I want you to leave me alone. And I want you to spend every single day for the rest of your miserable lives knowing that if you ever come near either of us again, the truth will destroy everything you've built. You're asking us to just walk away. I'm telling you to. Caroline's gun hand wavered. We could just kill you both right now. You could, but then the video uploads and you spend the next 20 years in federal prison explaining why a live stream caught you murdering 2 women. Your choice. The standoff stretched out like razor wire pulled taut. Finally, Judge Beaumont spoke. Release her. Caroline's head snapped toward him. Harold, release her. Now. Caroline hesitated, then slowly lowered the gun and stepped away from Marisol. Marisol's hands were still bound, but she was alive, breathing, safe. Celine walked forward carefully, keeping her phone visible, and cut through Marisol's restraints with a pocket knife she'd grabbed from the cabin. Marisol stood on shaking legs. They wrapped their arms around each other like shipwreck survivors clinging to driftwood. "Can you walk?" Celine whispered. "Better than I can stay here." They moved toward the warehouse exit, step by agonizing step, while three members of Charleston's most powerful family watched with murder in their eyes and impotence in their hands. Celine reached the door, pushed it open, turned back one last time. "You're right about one thing," she said to Judge Beaumont. "People like you decide who gets punished and who gets protected. But you forgot something. People like me decide when we're done being afraid." Then she walked out into the night with Marisol beside her and didn't look back. Behind them, the warehouse stood silent. Inside, three people who'd spent their entire lives believing they were untouchable stared at the space where their victims had been and realized, perhaps for the first time ever, that they'd miscalculated. Badly. And outside, in the shadows, where the moonlight couldn't reach, Dante Moretti lowered a pair of binoculars and spoke into his phone. "Did you get everything?" On the other end, his tech specialist confirmed. Every word, every admission, every threat, all backed up on 17 different servers across 9 countries. Celine's live stream had been real, but it hadn't been the only insurance policy in play. Dante had been recording too, from 3 different angles, with military-grade equipment that captured audio even through industrial walls. Because he'd meant what he said back at the cabin. He wasn't going to let her go alone. He just wasn't going to let the Beaumonts see him do it. Now he had everything he needed, not to frame them, to bury them, permanently. He ended the call and started walking toward the car where Celine and Marisol waited, disappearing into darkness like smoke, while behind him an empire built on blood and silence began its final, irreversible collapse. The car door opened and Dante slid into the driver's seat like he'd materialized out of the darkness itself. Celine jumped, her hand flying to her chest. "Jesus Christ! We need to move. Now!" He started the engine before she could respond. Marisol sat in the back seat, still shaking, blood dried on her temple, her eyes wide and glassy with shock. "How long were you—" "Long enough," Dante said, pulling onto the road with controlled speed that somehow felt faster than recklessness. "Long enough to record every word they said. Long enough to get what we need to destroy them permanently." Celine stared at him. "You were there the whole time. You didn't seriously think I'd let you walk into that warehouse alone, did you? You said—" "I said if they saw me, they'd kill Marisol. They didn't see me. Problem solved." His jaw was set like concrete. His hands gripped the steering wheel hard enough to turn his knuckles white, and his eyes stayed locked on the rear-view mirror, watching for headlights that hadn't appeared yet but would. They always did. "Where are we going?" Celine asked. "Somewhere they can't follow, somewhere we can finish this." "Dante." "Not now." The tone in his voice killed any argument before it could form. They drove in silence for 20 minutes, taking side roads and back routes that seemed random, but clearly weren't. Dante knew this city the way surgeons knew anatomy, every artery, every pressure point, every place you could cut without killing the whole organism. Finally, they pulled into an underground parking garage beneath a building Celine didn't recognize. Dante killed the engine and turned to face her. "The recordings I have are enough to reopen the federal investigation. Patricia's involvement, the Beaumonts' admissions, everything. But there's a problem." "What problem?" "Chain of custody. Defense attorneys will argue the recordings were obtained illegally. They'll claim editing, manipulation, lack of authentication, and they might win that argument because, technically, we were trespassing on private property when we recorded them." Celine's stomach sank. "So it's not enough. It's enough to create reasonable doubt, enough to put pressure on the family, enough to make their lives very difficult for a very long time. But it's not a guaranteed conviction, not without corroborating evidence, not without someone going on record who can testify to what the Beaumonts have done and survive cross-examination." He looked at her. Really looked. "Someone like you." Celine's throat closed up. "I thought you said testifying would get me killed." "It will if we do it their way. But if we control the narrative, if we go public before they can spin it, we might have a chance." "Might?" "Yeah, might. Marisol leaned forward from the back seat, her voice hoarse. What are you asking her to do? Dante's eyes never left Celine's face. I'm asking her to walk into the federal building tomorrow morning with every major news outlet present and tell her story on camera before the Beaumonts have time to stop her. No lawyers, no preparation, just raw testimony that's ugly and messy and human enough that people can't look away. That's suicide, Marisol whispered. Probably. Then we're not doing it. It's not your decision, Celine said quietly. Marisol grabbed her shoulder. Mija, you don't have to. Yes, I do. Celine turned to face the woman who'd been more mother than employer, more family than blood. You raised me to believe that silence was survival. And you were right. For a long time, that's exactly what it was. But I'm done surviving, Marisol. I want to live. And I can't do that as long as they're still out there destroying people. They'll tear you apart. Let them try. Dante interrupted before Marisol could argue further. There's one more thing. Patricia Reeves is still out there. She knows we have recordings. She knows her involvement is compromised, which means she's going to move fast to discredit everything before we can use it. How? By manufacturing evidence that you're mentally unstable, coerced, a victim of Stockholm Syndrome who's been brainwashed by a criminal. She's probably drafting the affidavits right now. Celine's hands clenched into fists. So what do? We beat her to it. We take control of the story before she can poison it. And we use the one weapon she doesn't have. What weapon? The truth. They spent the night in a secure apartment Dante maintained under a name that didn't appear in any database. 3 rooms, reinforced door, enough food for a week, windows that didn't open and walls thick enough to muffle gunshots. A fortress disguised as a home. Celine couldn't sleep. She lay on a bed that wasn't hers, staring at a ceiling that didn't belong to her, and tried to prepare herself for what was coming. Tomorrow, she would walk into a federal building and bear every scar, every bruise, every moment of degradation and terror that Tristan Beaumont had inflicted over 18 months. She would describe in excruciating detail how Judge Beaumont had threatened Marisol, how Caroline Beaumont had held a gun to an innocent woman's head, how a family that represented everything Charleston aspired to be was actually everything humanity should fear. And she would do it on camera, in front of reporters, with no script, no lawyer, no protection except the truth and the hope that someone, somewhere, would actually give a damn. The thought made her want to vomit. Around 3 in the morning, she gave up on sleep and walked into the living room. Dante sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by documents, his laptop open, his face illuminated by cold blue light. He looked up when she entered. Can't sleep? Can you? Not really. Celine sat down across from him. For a while, neither of them spoke. Then Dante closed his laptop and leaned back in his chair. You don't have to do this. Yes, I do. No, you don't. We can find another way. There is no other way. You know it. I know it. Tomorrow morning, I either stand up and tell the truth, or I spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder waiting for them to finish what they started. You could disappear. New identity, new city, new life. That's not a life. That's just a different kind of prison. Dante's jaw tightened. I've spent a decade building power specifically, so I'd never be helpless again. And now I'm sitting here watching you walk into a situation I can't control, against people I can't intimidate, with nothing but your word against theirs. You can't save everyone, Dante. I'm not trying to save everyone. I'm trying to save you. The words hung in the air between them like something fragile and dangerous. Celine looked at him, really looked, and saw something she'd been too terrified to acknowledge until now. This wasn't just about justice. This wasn't just about revenge. Somewhere along the way, it had become personal. Why does this matter so much to you? She asked quietly. Dante was silent for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough. Because you remind me of my mother. Because I failed her. And I can't fail you too. Because watching someone get destroyed just for trying to survive makes me want to burn the entire world down. Pick one. They're all true. I'm not your mother. I know. And you didn't fail her. You were a kid. Doesn't matter. I should have done something. Anything. Instead, I watched her die slowly and told myself there was nothing I could do. There wasn't. There's always something. Celine reached across the table and took his hand. His fingers closed around hers like a drowning man grabbing a lifeline. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For seeing me. For caring. For not walking away when it got complicated. You make it sound like I had a choice. You did. You always did." Dante's eyes met hers, and for just a moment, the criminal empire builder disappeared, and all that remained was a man who'd spent his entire life building walls to keep people out, only to find someone who'd somehow slipped through anyway. If this goes wrong tomorrow, it won't. But if it does, if they come after you, then you run. You take Marisol, and you disappear, and you don't look back. I'm not leaving you. You will if I tell you to. Try me. They sat in the darkness holding hands like teenagers at the end of the world, while the city slept outside and dawn crept closer with every passing second. The federal building stood in downtown Charleston like a monument to authority, all glass and steel and architectural intimidation. By 8 in the morning, news vans lined the street. Cameras, reporters, producers shouting into phones. The entire circus apparatus of American media descending on a story that had gone from society scandal to criminal investigation to cultural flashpoint in less than 2 weeks. Celine stood across the street with Dante beside her, and Marisol just behind them, staring at the building like it was a guillotine. "You ready?" Dante asked. "No." "Yeah." "Remember what we talked about. Speak directly. Don't let them interrupt you. If you start to panic, focus on one friendly face in the crowd and talk to them. Make it personal. Make it real." "I know." "And if at any point you want to stop, I won't." Dante nodded slowly. Then he did something unexpected. He pulled her into a hug. Not a polite embrace, a real one. The kind that said you matter and don't die and come back to me without requiring words. When he released her, his eyes were storm cloud dark. "Go make them pay." Celine nodded. Then she stepped into the street. The moment reporters saw her, chaos erupted. Cameras swiveled, microphones thrust forward, questions flew like shrapnel. "Celine, is it true you were coerced into the wedding? Did Dante Moretti fabricate evidence? Are you here to testify? What do you have to say about Judge Beaumont's statement calling you a liar?" Celine kept walking. Up the steps, through the doors, into the marble lobby where federal agents waited with the kind of expressions that suggested they'd been briefed on exactly who she was and what kind of disaster she represented. A woman in a severe suit stepped forward. "Ms. Vale, I'm Deputy Director Morrison. If you'd follow me, I want to give a statement on record right now." Morrison's eyes narrowed. "That's not how this works. Make it work. Ms. Vale, either you take my statement now in front of those cameras outside, or I walk out of here and tell every reporter on that street that the FBI refused to let me testify. Your choice." Morrison's jaw clenched. Then she turned to one of the agents standing nearby. "Get the prosecutors, now. Go on." 20 minutes later, Celine sat in a conference room with 3 federal prosecutors, 2 FBI agents, and enough recording equipment to make a documentary. Through the glass wall, she could see reporters pressing against the building's exterior windows, cameras rolling, the entire spectacle broadcasting live to anyone with a phone or television. No hiding, no privacy, just raw exposure. One of the prosecutors, a man in his 50s with gray hair and tired eyes, set a legal pad on the table. "Ms. Vale, before we begin, I need to inform you that anything you say can be used in court. You have the right to an attorney. I don't want an attorney. I want to tell you what happened. We strongly advise I've been advised my entire life. Look where it got me. Can we start, or are we doing this dance until they find a way to stop me?" The prosecutor exchanged glances with his colleagues. Then he pressed record. "State your name for the record." "Celine Marie Vale." "And you're here voluntarily?" "I'm here because I'm done being silent." "Can you describe your relationship with Tristan Beaumont?" Celine took a breath, and then she started talking. She described meeting Tristan at a charity event 3 years ago. The charm, the attention, the way he made her feel seen for the first time in her life. She described how the romance became control, how he monitored her phone, isolated her from friends, criticized everything from her clothes to her laugh to the way she breathed too loudly during dinner. She described the first time he hit her. the apology that followed, the flowers, the promises, the cycle that repeated until she couldn't remember what normal felt like anymore. She described the broken ribs, the concussion, the bruises hidden beneath makeup and long sleeves and carefully constructed lies. She described escaping to Charleston and building a life small enough to feel safe. And then she described Judge Harold Beaumont appearing at her apartment with fabricated evidence and threats against Marisol. Her voice never wavered, never broke. She spoke like someone reading a grocery list, clinical, detached, factual, because emotion would shatter her, and she couldn't afford to shatter until this was finished. The prosecutors listened in silence. One of them was taking notes. Another looked faintly ill. The third just stared at her like she was something that had crawled out of a nightmare and refused to die. When she finally finished, the room was silent. Then the lead prosecutor cleared his throat. "Ms. Vale, these are serious allegations. Do you have any evidence to support?" The conference room door opened. Dante walked in carrying a laptop. Behind him, 2 FBI agents moved to intercept. "Sir, you can't—" "Yes, I can. Ms. Vale is giving testimony voluntarily. I'm providing corroborating evidence. Unless you want to explain to a judge why you refuse documented proof of federal crimes, I suggest you sit down and shut up." The agents looked at the prosecutors. The prosecutors looked at each other. Then the lead prosecutor nodded. Dante set the laptop on the table and opened it. Audio files, video recordings, timestamps, metadata authentication reports, everything captured from the warehouse the night before. Judge Beaumont admitting to trafficking operations, Caroline Beaumont threatening murder, Tristan confirming coercion. All of it laid bare in high-definition clarity. The prosecutor's face went pale. "Where did you get this? Does it matter?" "It matters if we want to use it in court. Then I guess you'd better find a way to make it admissible, because that's everything you need to bury the Beaumont family for the next 3 lifetimes." One of the FBI agents leaned over to watch the footage. 30 seconds later, he looked at his colleague. "Call the director, now." By noon, the federal building was under siege, not from protesters, from lawyers. The Beaumont family's entire legal team descended like locusts, filing motions, demanding access, threatening lawsuits, doing everything in their considerable power to stop the freight train that was already barreling down the tracks toward them. Patricia Reeves stood at the center of it, orchestrating the defense with surgical precision. But something had shifted. The prosecutors weren't backing down. The FBI wasn't retreating. And every major news outlet in the country was running footage of Celine's testimony on repeat, alongside leaked audio from the warehouse recording. Public opinion turned on a dime. Charleston's elite found themselves suddenly scrambling to distance from the Beaumont family. Political allies issued carefully worded statements. Campaign donors pulled funding. Social invitations dried up overnight. By sunset, Judge Harold Beaumont's resignation from the bench was announced. By midnight, arrest warrants were issued, and by dawn the next morning, federal agents stormed the Beaumont estate with enough firepower to invade a small country. Celine watched it all unfold from the secure apartment, sitting beside Dante on a couch that didn't belong to her, staring at a television broadcasting the destruction of an empire in real time. Footage of agents leading Harold Beaumont out of his mansion in handcuffs. Caroline Beaumont screaming at reporters from the back of a police cruiser. Tristan being arrested at his law firm while partners watched in horror. The complete and total collapse of Charleston's most untouchable family. And in the center of it all, the woman who'd brought them down by doing the one thing they never expected, telling the truth. Celine's phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. She opened it. A photograph of Patricia Reeves being escorted out of her office by FBI agents, her face twisted with fury and disbelief. Below the image, a single line. Obstruction of justice. Evidence tampering. Conspiracy. She'll be joining her client soon. No signature. But Celine knew who it was from. Someone inside the investigation who wanted her to know that justice wasn't just a word anymore. It was actually happening. She set the phone down and exhaled slowly. Dante looked at her. "How do you feel?" Celine thought about it. Really thought. "Empty," she admitted. "Like I've been carrying something heavy for so long that now that it's gone, I don't know what to do with my hands." "That's normal." "Is it?" "I don't know. I've never let go of anything in my life. They sat in silence for a while. Then Marisol appeared in the doorway, holding 3 mugs of tea that smelled like the kitchen she'd maintained for the Beaumont family before everything fell apart. "You need to eat something," she said. "I'm not hungry." "I don't care. You're eating anyway." It was the most Marisol sentence imaginable. Celine took the tea and smiled faintly. For the first time in weeks, the apartment didn't feel like a fortress. It felt like a home. 3 days later, Celine received a summons to appear before a grand jury. They wanted her testimony officially on record. They wanted every detail, every moment, every scar. Dante offered to go with her. She said no. This part she needed to do alone. The grand jury room was smaller than she expected, less formal. A dozen people sitting in chairs arranged in a semicircle, watching her with expressions ranging from sympathy to skepticism to barely concealed disgust. She told her story again, start to finish, every degrading detail, every moment of terror, every choice that wasn't really a choice. When she finished, the jury foreman, a woman in her 60s with kind eyes, asked one question. "Ms. Vale, why should we believe you?" Celine looked at her. "Because I'm still here. Because I survived. Because I could have disappeared and never said a word, but instead I walked into this building knowing exactly what it would cost me. And if that's not enough proof that I'm telling the truth, then nothing will be." The room was silent. Then the foreman nodded. "Thank you, Ms. Vale. That will be all." The indictments came down 2 weeks later. Federal Judge Harold Beaumont. Conspiracy, human trafficking, obstruction of justice, witness tampering, racketeering. Caroline Beaumont. Conspiracy, attempted murder, accessory to trafficking. Tristan Beaumont. Domestic violence, coercion, conspiracy. Patricia Reeves. Obstruction of justice, conspiracy, evidence tampering, fraud. Bail was denied across the board, flight risk, danger to witnesses. The entire family locked up pending trial. Charleston's most untouchable dynasty reduced to orange jumpsuits and county jail cells. Celine watched the news coverage from Dante's estate, where she'd been staying since the grand jury testimony. Not as a prisoner, not as someone hiding, just as someone figuring out what life looked like when you weren't running anymore. Dante appeared behind her, 2 glasses of wine in hand. He offered one. She took it. "They're saying the trial could take years," he said. "I know. You'll have to testify again, multiple times. Defense attorneys will tear you apart. I know that too. And even after all that, there's no guarantee they'll convict." Celine turned to face him. "Are you trying to scare me?" "I'm trying to prepare you. I've been prepared since the moment I walked into that cathedral and saw you standing there like judgment itself. Everything since then has just been follow-through." Dante smiled faintly. "You've changed. So have you." "How so?" "You're less terrifying when you smile." "I'll take that as a compliment." They stood together looking out over Charleston Harbor while the city lights flickered like dying stars, and the future stretched ahead of them, uncertain, dangerous, and somehow more real than anything either of them had known before. "What happens now?" Celine asked. "Now?" Dante set his wine glass down and turned to face her fully. "Now we figure out what life looks like when you're not just surviving anymore." "I don't know how to do that." "Neither do I. But I'm willing to learn if you are." Celine looked at him, this man who'd walked into her life like a hurricane and somehow become the only stable thing in it, and felt something shift inside her chest. Not love, not yet, but the foundation love could build on. Trust. "Yeah," she said quietly. "I think I'd like that." Dante reached out and took her hand, and for the first time in her entire life, Celine Vale held on freely. Not because she was trapped, not because she was afraid, but because she wanted to. Because after surviving violence and corruption and the destruction of an empire, she'd finally found something stronger than fear. Choice. The next morning, Celine woke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar windows and the smell of coffee drifting up from downstairs. She got dressed slowly, pulling on clothes that didn't carry the weight of someone else's expectations, and walked downstairs to find Dante in the kitchen reading a newspaper like a man who hadn't just orchestrated the collapse of Charleston's most powerful family. He looked up when she entered. There's coffee. Thanks. She poured herself a cup and sat down across from him. For a while, they just existed in comfortable silence. Then Dante folded the newspaper and set it aside. I have something to tell you. Celine's stomach tightened. What? The federal prosecutors want to offer you witness protection, full relocation, new identity, new life, everything. The words hung in the air like an executioner's blade. And I told them you'd think about it. What did you tell them? That it's your decision, not mine, not theirs, yours. Celine stared into her coffee cup. Witness protection meant safety. It meant disappearing so completely that the Beaumonts, or whoever they hired, would never find her. It meant starting over in a place where nobody knew her name or her history or the things she'd survived. It meant freedom. But it also meant leaving behind everything she'd just started building. Leaving Marisol. Leaving Dante. Leaving the fragile sense of home she'd finally started to feel. I don't want to disappear, she said quietly. Then don't. But if you stay, you live your life on your terms. You build something real. And if anyone tries to hurt you, they'll have to go through me first. Celine looked up. Dante's expression was unreadable, but his eyes told a different story. Stay, please. I can't promise safety, but I can promise I'll fight for you until there's nothing left to fight with. That's a lot to ask, Celine whispered. I'm not asking. I'm offering. Why? Because you walked into that federal building alone and told the truth, even though it could have destroyed you. Because you've survived things that would have broken most people. Because you remind me that maybe the world isn't entirely full of monsters. And because... He stopped. Because what? Because somewhere along the way, this stopped being about saving you and started being about not wanting to lose you. The confession landed between them like something fragile and terrifying. Celine's throat burned. I'm not easy to be around. I'm broken in ways I don't even understand yet. I wake up at 3 a.m, convinced someone's breaking down the door. I flinch when people raise their voices. I don't know how to trust or how to let people in, or how to believe that safety is anything other than an illusion people tell themselves before everything falls apart. I know. And you still want me to stay? I don't want you to do anything. I want you to choose. Whatever that choice is, I'll respect it. Celine set her coffee cup down, stood up, walked around the table, and without overthinking it, without second-guessing herself, without listening to the voice in her head that screamed that this was dangerous and stupid and destined to end in heartbreak, she kissed him. Dante froze for half a second. Then his hands came up to frame her face, and he kissed her back like she was oxygen, and he'd been drowning for years. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Celine rested her forehead against his. I'm staying, she whispered. You sure? No, but I'm doing it anyway. Dante laughed. A real laugh, not the cold, calculated sound he used in business meetings, and pulled her closer. Then I guess we're both figuring this out as we go. I guess we are. They stood together in the morning sunlight while the coffee went cold, and the city breathed peacefully beyond the windows. And for the first time in longer than either of them could remember, the future didn't feel like something to survive. It felt like something worth fighting for. But peace, Celine was learning, was never permanent. It was something you had to defend every single day. The phone rang. Dante answered it, listened for 10 seconds, and his entire expression went cold. When? A pause. How many? Another pause. I'm on my way. He hung up and looked at Celine and the look on his face made her blood turn to ice. What happened? Tristan made bail. The words detonated in the space between them. That's impossible. They denied. Someone pulled strings, called in favors. I don't know how, but he's out. And according to my people, he was last seen 20 minutes ago heading toward this address. Celine's legs nearly gave out. He's coming here. Yeah. How does he even know where? Doesn't matter. What matters is that we have maybe 10 minutes before he arrives. So we have 2 choices, run or stay and end this. Celine's hands shook so badly she had to clench them into fists to keep them still. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to disappear, to do what she'd always done when Tristan came too close. But she'd walked into a federal building and told the truth. She'd testified in front of a grand jury. She'd watched an empire collapse because she refused to stay silent, and she was done running. "We stay," she said. Dante's eyes went dark. "You understand what that means." "I understand that if we run now, we'll be running forever, so we stay, and we finish this." For a long moment, Dante just looked at her. Then he pulled out his phone and started making calls. 8 minutes later, Dante's estate transformed into a fortress. Armed guards positioned at every entrance. Security cameras activated. Reinforced doors locked and bolted. Every exit strategy mapped. Every contingency planned. Dante moved through it all with the calm efficiency of someone who'd done this before, issuing orders and clipped sentences that left no room for argument. Celine stood in the living room watching him work and tried to control the panic clawing up her throat. Tristan was coming. The man who'd broken her ribs. The man who'd dragged her across floors. The man who'd convinced her for 18 months that she deserved every moment of pain he inflicted. And now, he was coming here to finish what he'd started. Marisol appeared beside her, pale but steady. "We should leave." "No." "Mija, I'm not running anymore. If he wants me, he's going to have to go through Dante first, and I don't think he's prepared for what that means." Marisol looked like she wanted to argue, but before she could, headlights appeared at the end of the driveway. A single car, moving fast. Dante's phone buzzed. He looked at the screen and his jaw clenched. "It's him!" Celine's heart hammered against her ribs. The car stopped at the gate. Someone got out, walked toward the intercom, pressed the button, and Tristan Beaumont's voice echoed through the estate's speakers like something crawling out of hell. "Celine, I know you're in there. We need to talk." Dante moved to respond. Celine stopped him. "Let me." "Celine, this is my fight. Let me handle it." She walked to the intercom and pressed the talk button. "There's nothing to say, Tristan. Go home." "I can't go home. I don't have one anymore. You took everything from me." "You did that yourself." "I loved you. I still love you. Everything you did was abuse, and I'm done pretending it was anything else. Just let me in. 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking." "No." "Celine, please." "I said no. Leave. Now. Before this gets worse." Silence. Then Tristan's voice came back, colder than winter. "If you won't let me in, I'll come in myself." The line went dead. For 3 seconds, nothing happened. Then the sound of an engine revving filled the night. Headlights blazed, and Tristan's car slammed into the estate's front gate at full speed. Metal screeched. The gate buckled, but held. He reversed, accelerated again. This time, the gate gave way. The car roared up the driveway toward the house like a battering ram made of steel and rage, and 18 months of obsession finally given permission to destroy everything. Dante grabbed Celine's arm. "Upstairs, now." "I'm not, now." The command in his voice was absolute. Celine ran. Behind her, she heard Dante shouting orders to his security team, heard the sound of weapons being readied, heard the car crash into something, the fountain maybe, or the front steps, followed by the distinct sound of a door being kicked open. And then she heard Tristan's voice, loud and raw and completely unhinged. "Celine!" She froze halfway up the stairs. Every muscle in her body screamed at her to keep running. But something else, something she didn't recognize until that moment, made her turn around. She walked back down the stairs, into the foyer, where Tristan stood in the doorway, wild-eyed and disheveled, holding something in his right hand that caught the light and made Celine's stomach drop. A gun. Dante and 3 security guards surrounded him instantly, their own weapons drawn. "Put it down," Dante said, his voice deadly calm. Tristan didn't move. His eyes locked onto Celine. "You destroyed my family. Your family destroyed itself. Because of you. Because of your father, your mother, and you. I just stopped letting you get away with it. We could have fixed this. We could have—" "No, Tristan. We couldn't. Because you never saw me as a person. You saw me as something you owned, and I'm done being owned." Tristan's hand trembled. The gun wavered. "I loved you. You don't know what love is." "I do!" The scream tore out of him like something dying. "I loved you more than anything, and you threw it away. You walked away from me. From us. From everything we could have been. We were never going to be anything except your victim and you. That's not true. Yes, it is. And deep down, you know it. Tristan's face twisted. Tears streamed down his cheeks. The gun rose slowly until it pointed directly at Celine's chest. Every guard tensed. Dante moved to step between them. But Celine held up her hand. If you're going to shoot me, Tristan, do it. Pull the trigger, end this. But understand something first. The moment you fire that gun, you prove everything I said about you. You prove that you're exactly the monster everyone now knows you are. And you'll spend the rest of your life in prison knowing that the woman you claim to love would rather die than spend another second afraid of you. Tristan's finger moved to the trigger. Time stretched. Celine didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't beg. She just stood there, looking the man who'd terrorized her for years directly in the eye and refused to let him see her fear, because she wasn't afraid anymore. Not of him, not of the gun, not of dying. She was only afraid of going back to the person she'd been before she learned how to fight. The gun wavered. Tristan's hand shook. And then, slowly, he lowered the weapon. I can't, he whispered. I know. I wanted to. I wanted to so badly. I know that too. Security moved in instantly, disarming him, forcing him to the ground, restraining him while he sobbed like something broken. Police sirens wailed in the distance. Someone had called them. Probably Dante. Celine stood frozen in place, adrenaline crashing through her system like electricity. Her entire body shaking so hard she thought she might collapse. Dante appeared beside her, his hand on her shoulder, steady and warm and real. You okay? Was she? Ask me tomorrow. Fair enough. They watched as police flooded the estate, as Tristan was dragged away, still screaming her name, as the nightmare that had defined her life for 3 years finally, definitively, ended. And when it was over, when the cars were gone and the sirens faded and silence settled over the estate like snow, Celine turned to Dante and said the only thing that made sense. I think I need a drink. Dante laughed. A real laugh. Yeah, me too. They walked inside together, leaving the shattered gate and broken fountain and all the wreckage of the past behind them. Because tomorrow, they'd have to deal with lawyers and prosecutors and the media circus that would inevitably follow. But tonight, they were alive. They were free. And that, Celine was learning, was enough. The trial began on a Tuesday morning in late autumn when Charleston's humidity finally broke and the air turned crisp enough to breathe without feeling like you were drowning. Celine sat in the front row of the federal courthouse, wearing a navy dress Marisol had helped her pick out. Simple, professional. The kind of outfit that said she was taking this seriously without trying to perform respectability for people who'd already made up their minds about her. Beside her sat Dante, dressed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, his presence a silent statement that she wasn't alone anymore. Across the aisle, separated by 20 feet and a universe of consequences, sat the Beaumont family. Judge Harold Beaumont looked older than Celine remembered. His silver hair had gone white. His face carried lines that hadn't been there 3 months ago. Prison jumpsuits didn't suit him the way custom-tailored suits had, and the absence of authority made him look smaller somehow, like a statue removed from its pedestal and revealed to be nothing more than plaster and paint. Caroline Beaumont sat rigid and furious, her designer clothes replaced by county-issued gray, her expression carved from pure contempt. Even in handcuffs, she managed to look down her nose at everyone in the courtroom as if she were still the arbiter of Charleston society instead of a woman facing life in prison. And Tristan. Tristan sat between his parents looking like he'd aged a decade in 3 months. Thinner, hollow-eyed. The entitled arrogance that used to define him had been stripped away, leaving behind something fragile and broken. He didn't look at Celine, not once, not during jury selection, not during opening statements, not when the prosecution presented evidence of the trafficking network, the falsified court documents, the witness tampering, the decades of corruption disguised as public service. He just stared at the table in front of him like if he looked hard enough, he could disappear into it. Celine understood that impulse. She'd spent 18 months trying to disappear. It didn't work then either. Hulk. The prosecution's case took 3 weeks to present. They called witnesses who testified about missing women. Shipping manifests that didn't add up. Financial records showing money moving through shell companies designed to hide human cargo alongside legitimate freight. Sealed court orders that buried investigations before they could begin. Testimonies from survivors who'd been trafficked through Charleston Harbor, sold like livestock, disappeared into lives they never chose. Women who looked like Celine, talked like her, carried the same exhaustion in their eyes that came from surviving things that should have killed them. Each testimony felt like a mirror reflecting back pieces of herself she'd tried to forget. When it was finally Celine's turn to take the stand, she walked to the witness box on legs that felt borrowed from someone braver and sat down in front of 300 strangers who would decide whether her truth mattered. The prosecutor, a woman named Rachel Chen with sharp eyes and sharper questions, approached slowly. Ms. Vale, can you describe your relationship with the defendant Tristan Beaumont? Celine took a breath and began. She described meeting him, the courtship, the romance that became ownership, the isolation, the control, the escalation from criticism to violence in increments so small she didn't recognize the trap until it had already closed around her. She described the broken ribs, the concussion, the bruises, the apologies that meant nothing, the terror that lived in her chest like something with teeth. She described escaping to Charleston and believing she was finally safe. And then she described Judge Beaumont appearing at her apartment with threats and fabricated evidence and a choice that wasn't really a choice at all. Marry Tristan or watch Marisol die. Marry Tristan or go to prison. Marry Tristan or lose everything. Her voice stayed steady throughout. Clinical, factual, like she was reading someone else's trauma instead of reliving her own. When she finished, Rachel Chen nodded slowly. Thank you, Ms. Vale. No further questions. Then came the defense. Tristan's attorney, a man named Marcus Webb, who looked like he'd been born in a courtroom and would probably die in one, stood up with the predatory calm of someone who'd made a career out of destroying credible witnesses. Ms. Vale, he began, his voice dripping with false sympathy. You've painted quite a picture for this jury, a story of abuse and coercion and helplessness. But I have to ask, if things were truly as terrible as you claim, why did you stay for 18 months? Celine had prepared for this question. Patricia Reeves had warned her it was coming before her own arrest for obstruction of justice. But knowing it was coming didn't make it hurt less. Because leaving seemed more dangerous than staying, she said quietly. More dangerous how? Because Tristan told me if I ever left, he'd find me, and I believed him. But you did leave eventually. Yes. So what changed? Celine looked directly at the jury. I realized that dying slowly every day was worse than risking death all at once. Marcus Webb's expression flickered, and Ms. Vale, isn't it true that you were employed by Dante Moretti, a known criminal with extensive connections to organized crime? I kept books for his company. I didn't ask questions about what else he did. But you knew. I suspected. And yet you continued working for him. I needed the job. Or perhaps you needed his connections, his resources, his ability to fabricate evidence and frame innocent people for crimes they didn't commit. Objection, Rachel Chen said sharply. Asked and answered. Defense is badgering the witness. Sustained, the judge replied. Move on, Mr. Webb. Webb smiled thinly. Ms. Vale, you've testified that Judge Beaumont threatened you, but isn't it true that the only evidence of these threats comes from recordings obtained illegally through trespassing and wiretapping? The recordings are real. What was said is real. The methods don't change the truth. They change what we can prove in a court of law. Then maybe the law needs to do a better job protecting people who can't afford expensive attorneys to hide their crimes. The courtroom erupted. The judge banged his gavel. Marcus Webb's face turned red. But Celine didn't back down. She'd walked into a federal building and told the truth when everyone said she'd be destroyed for it. She wasn't going to flinch now just because a lawyer in an expensive suit wanted her to. Webb tried for another hour to discredit her testimony, tried to paint her as mentally unstable, tried to suggest she'd been manipulated by Dante, tried to convince the jury that she was a scorned woman seeking revenge for a relationship that simply didn't work out. But every attack bounced off like bullets hitting bulletproof glass. Because Celine had stopped caring what people like Marcus Webb thought about her. She only cared about the 12 people in the jury box, And when she finally stepped down from the witness stand 3 hours later, exhausted and wrung out but still standing, she met Dante's eyes across the courtroom. He nodded once, small, almost imperceptible, but it meant everything. You did it. You survived. The jury deliberated for 6 days. 6 days of waiting. 6 days of Celine pacing Dante's estate like a caged animal, unable to eat, unable to sleep, unable to do anything except replay every moment of her testimony and wonder if she'd done enough. Marisol tried to distract her with cooking. Dante tried to distract her with work. Nothing worked. On the 6th day, the call came. Verdict reached. They drove to the courthouse in silence, Celine's hands clenched so tightly in her lap that her knuckles turned white. Inside, the courtroom was packed. Reporters, spectators, victims who'd come forward after Celine's testimony made national news. Families of missing women who'd spent years wondering what happened to daughters and sisters and mothers who'd simply disappeared. The Beaumont family sat stone-faced at the defense table. Celine sat in the front row with Dante on one side and Marisol on the other, flanked by the only family that had ever actually protected her. The jury filed in. None of them looked at the defendants. That was usually a bad sign for the defense. The judge cleared his throat. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" The foreman stood. "We have, Your Honor." "On the charge of conspiracy to commit human trafficking, how do you find the defendant Harold Beaumont?" "Guilty." The word detonated through the courtroom. Caroline Beaumont made a sound like something dying. Judge Beaumont's face went gray. "On the charge of obstruction of justice?" "Guilty." "Witness tampering?" "Guilty." "Racketeering?" "Guilty." The list went on, charge after charge, crime after crime, guilty, guilty, guilty. By the time the foreman finished reading the verdict for Harold Beaumont, Caroline Beaumont was sobbing openly, all her aristocratic composure shattered like porcelain dropped from a height. Then came her charges: conspiracy, attempted murder, accessory to trafficking, guilty on all counts. And finally, Tristan, domestic violence, coercion, conspiracy. The foreman looked directly at Tristan when he read the verdict. Guilty. Tristan closed his eyes. His shoulders sagged, and for just a moment Celine almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Then she remembered the broken ribs, the concussion, the 18 months of walking on eggshells and apologizing for breathing too loud, and the sympathy evaporated like morning fog. The judge banged his gavel. Sentencing will be scheduled for 30 days from today. Defendants will remain in custody pending sentencing. This court is adjourned. The courtroom erupted into chaos. Reporters rushed for the exits. Victims wept. Defense attorneys scrambled to file appeals that everyone knew wouldn't matter. And Celine sat perfectly still, staring at the empty jury box, trying to process that it was actually over, really over. No more trials, no more testimony, no more looking over her shoulder wondering when they'd come after her again. Justice, real, messy, complicated justice, had actually happened. Dante's hand found hers. "You okay?" Celine looked at him with eyes that burned from unshed tears. "I don't know. Ask me in an hour." He smiled faintly. "That's becoming your standard answer." "It's a good answer." "Yeah, it is." They sat together while the courtroom emptied around them. Two people who'd survived the kind of war most people only read about, holding on to each other like lifelines while the world rearranged itself into something that almost resembled peace. Sentencing came 30 days later. Judge Harold Beaumont received 25 years in federal prison. Caroline Beaumont received 15. Tristan received 8, with credit for time served and eligibility for parole in 5. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. No prison sentence could give Celine back the years she'd lost. No verdict could erase the scars. No judge could undo the damage that 3 people had inflicted on dozens of lives over decades of unchecked power. But it was something, and something Celine was learning was better than the nothing she'd lived with for most of her life. 6 months after the sentencing, Celine stood in front of a restored brick building near Charleston Harbor and stared at the sign hanging above the entrance. Haven House. A shelter for women escaping abuse and coercion. She'd used the settlement money from the civil suit against the Beaumont estate to buy the building. Dante had helped renovate it. Marisol managed the day-to-day operations. And Celine ran programs teaching financial literacy, legal rights, and self-defense to women who'd spent years being told they were powerless. It wasn't perfect. Funding was always tight. Some women left and went back to their abusers. Some nights, Celine still woke up at 3 in the morning, convinced someone was breaking down the door. But other nights, she slept straight through until dawn. And that was progress. The front door opened. A woman stepped out. Early 20s, dark hair, eyes that had seen too much too soon. She'd arrived 3 weeks ago with nothing but the clothes on her back and bruises that told a story Celine knew by heart. Now she was leaving with a job lined up, an apartment secured, and legal documents ensuring her ex-husband couldn't come near her without facing arrest. "Thank you," the woman said quietly, "for everything." Celine smiled. "You did the hard part. You walked through that door. Everything else was just logistics." "Still, thank you." The woman walked away. Celine watched her go and felt something shift in her chest. Not happiness exactly, not yet, but maybe the foundation happiness could build on. Purpose. That evening, Celine returned to the estate she'd been living in for the past 6 months. Not as a guest, not as someone hiding, just as someone who'd finally stopped running long enough to build something real. Dante was in the kitchen making dinner, an activity that still surprised her every time she witnessed it. This dangerous man who controlled half of Charleston's criminal infrastructure chopping vegetables like a Food Network host. "How was your day?" he asked without looking up. "Good. Helped another woman get out, signed the lease on the second facility, yelled at a funding coordinator who tried to tell me we should focus on reforming abusers instead of protecting victims." "How'd that go?" "I may have told him to go reform himself." Dante laughed. "That's my girl." The phrase should have felt possessive, should have triggered every alarm bell she'd spent 3 years developing. Instead, it just felt warm, safe, like something she could choose to hold on to instead of something holding on to her. She sat at the counter and watched him work. "Dante? Yeah? Why did you really do all this? The truth. Not the version you tell yourself to sleep at night." He stopped chopping, set the knife down, turned to face her fully. "Because you reminded me that people are worth saving, even when they don't think they are, even when the cost is high, even when it's easier to look away." "That's not an answer." "Yes, it is. You just don't like how simple it sounds." "It doesn't sound simple. It sounds impossible." "Most good things do." Celine looked at him, really looked, at this man who'd walked into her life like a hurricane and somehow become the most stable thing in it. "I think I might be falling in love with you." The words hung in the air between them like something fragile and terrifying. Dante's expression didn't change. "You think? I don't trust my judgment on these things. My track record is pretty terrible." "Fair point. So what do we do?" Dante crossed the kitchen and stopped directly in front of her, close enough to touch, far enough to let her choose whether to close the distance. "We take it slow. We figure it out as we go. We fuck up occasionally because we're both damaged in ways that don't have instruction manuals. And we trust that maybe, just maybe, being broken together is better than being broken alone." Celine's eyes burned. "That's the most unromantic romantic thing anyone's ever said to me." "I'm not very good at romance." "Neither am I." "Then I guess we're well matched." She kissed him, slow and careful, and waited with the knowledge that this wasn't some fairy tale ending where the hero saved the damsel and they rode off into the sunset. This was two people who'd survived things that should have destroyed them, choosing each other not because it was easy, but because it was real. When they broke apart, Dante rested his forehead against hers. "I can't promise I'll never hurt you." "I know. And I can't promise this will be easy." "I don't want easy. I want honest." "Then I can promise you that." "Good." They stood together in the kitchen while dinner cooled on the counter and the city breathed peacefully beyond the windows. And for the first time in her entire life, Celine Vale felt something she'd stopped believing was possible. Hope. 1 year later, autumn returned to Charleston with the kind of gentle cruelty that made you remember why you'd survived the summer. Celine stood on the balcony of Haven House watching women arrive for the evening support group, a gathering that happened every Tuesday where survivors shared stories and strategies and the kind of hard-won wisdom that only came from walking through fire and choosing to keep walking. The building had expanded, 2 floors now, 20 beds, programs for job training, legal aid, therapy, childcare. Everything a woman needed to rebuild a life after it had been demolished. Marisol appeared beside her carrying 2 cups of coffee. "You're thinking too loud again." Celine smiled. "Just remembering what this place looked like a year ago?" "Empty." "Yeah." "Now look at it." Celine looked. The building was full, not with despair, with possibility. Women who'd been told they were nothing learning, they were everything. Women who'd been silenced, finding their voices. Women who'd been broken, discovering they were actually stronger in the broken places. "I'm proud of you, mija," Marisol said quietly. Celine's throat tightened. "I couldn't have done this without you." "Yes, you could have, but I'm glad you didn't have to." They stood together watching the sun set over Charleston Harbor, 2 women who'd survived the same kind of monsters through different decades, bound together by something stronger than blood. Choice. That night, Selena returned to the estate to find Dante waiting on the back patio with champagne and a look on his face she couldn't quite read. "What's this?" she asked. "An anniversary." "Of what?" "The day you walked into that federal building and changed everything." Celine sat down beside him. "That was 14 months ago." "I know, I'm fashionably late celebrating it." "You're terrible at this." "I warned you." He poured 2 glasses and handed her one. "To surviving," he said. "To surviving," Celine echoed. They drank in comfortable silence. Then Dante set his glass down and pulled a small envelope from his jacket pocket. "I have something for you." "Dante, you don't have to." "Just open it." Celine opened the envelope. Inside was a single piece of paper. A property deed. For the building that housed Haven House. Transferred entirely into her name. No strings, no conditions. Just hers. "I don't understand." "You built that place from nothing. You pour everything you have into it, and I wanted to make sure that if anything ever happens to me, you don't lose it. It's yours. Legally, permanently. No one can take it away." Celine stared at the document with tears streaming down her face. "Why would you do this?" "Because you spent your whole life being told you didn't deserve to own anything. Not property, not safety, not even your own choices. So now you do. You own something real, something that matters, and no one can ever take it from you again." She couldn't speak, couldn't breathe, could only sit there holding proof that someone actually saw her as more than a victim, or a burden, or something to be owned. Someone saw her as a person worthy of trust and investment and a future that belonged to her. Dante's hand found hers. "You don't have to say anything. Just know that I meant what I said a year ago. Being broken together is better than being broken alone. And I'd rather be broken with you than whole with anyone else." Celine looked at him through tear-blurred vision. "I love you." No hesitation, no qualifier, just truth. Dante's expression softened. "I love you too." They sat together on the patio while the stars emerged overhead, and the world turned beneath them, and somewhere in the distance, women who'd been told they were worthless learned they were priceless. And Celine Vale, survivor, fighter, builder of sanctuaries, finally understood that freedom wasn't something someone gave you. It was something you claimed every single day. Through choices big and small, through refusing to stay silent, through building something beautiful out of the ruins of what almost destroyed you, through loving people who deserved it, and through learning, slowly and painfully and beautifully, that survival wasn't the end goal. It was just the beginning. Okay. 5 years later, Charleston's autumn arrived with the kind of golden light that made everything look painted. Celine stood at a podium in front of 200 people, advocates, survivors, legislators, donors, and looked out at faces that had once seemed impossible to reach. Haven House had grown. 4 locations across 3 states, hundreds of women served, legislation passed, systems changed. Not fixed, never fixed, but better. Slowly, painfully, measurably better. "When I walked away from my abuser 5 years ago," Celine said, her voice steady and clear, "I thought survival was the victory. I thought making it out alive was enough. But survival is just the foundation. What we build on it, that's what matters. The lives we reconstruct, the systems we dismantle, the women we protect, the cycle we break. That's the real victory. Applause erupted. Celine stepped away from the podium and walked backstage where Dante waited with their daughter balanced on his hip. 3 years old, dark hair like her father, eyes like her mother. A name chosen carefully, Elena, meaning light, because after years of darkness, they decided to raise something bright. Mama! Elena reached for her. Celine took her, held her close, breathed in the scent of toddler shampoo and infinite possibility. This child would never know what it felt like to flinch when someone raised their voice, would never learn that love came with bruises, would never spend 18 months disappearing into someone else's idea of who she should be. Because Celine would make damn sure of it. Dante kissed her temple. You were amazing. I was terrified. Doesn't mean you weren't amazing. Elena squirmed. Down. Celine set her down and watched her run toward Marisol, who waited nearby with the patient affection of someone who'd spent decades learning that love meant showing up even when it was hard. You ever think about how different things would be if you hadn't walked into that cathedral? Celine asked quietly. Dante considered. Every day. Regret it? Not even once. Even with everything it cost? Especially because of everything it cost. The things worth having usually are expensive. Celine leaned into him. I used to think my life would always be defined by what happened to me. That I'd always be Tristan's victim, Harold Beaumont's target, the woman who almost married a monster. And now? Now I'm the woman who walked away, who built something real, who loved someone who loved her back without trying to own her, who raised a daughter who will never have to learn what fear tastes like. That's a pretty good story. Yeah, it is. They stood together backstage while the conference continued without them. Two people who'd survived the kind of war most people only read about, watching their daughter play with the woman who'd helped raise them both in different ways. And Celine Vale, no longer a victim, no longer running, no longer afraid, finally understood that healing wasn't a destination. It was a direction. And every day she woke up and chose to keep moving forward was another day she proved that the people who tried to destroy her had failed. Not because she forgot, not because she forgave, but because she refused to let their violence be the last word written about her life. She was writing her own story now, and it was just getting started. Eek. That evening, as the sun set over Charleston Harbor, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose, Celine sat on the back patio of the home she'd built with Dante and watched Elena chase fireflies across the lawn. Marisol dozed in a chair nearby, wrapped in a blanket, peaceful and safe, and surrounded by the family she'd chosen when blood family had failed her. Dante appeared with 2 glasses of wine. She's going to sleep well tonight, he said, gesturing to Elena, if we're lucky. When are we ever lucky? Celine smiled. Fair point. They sat together in comfortable silence, watching their daughter discover the world one firefly at a time, while the city they'd both fought to survive in breathed peacefully beyond the walls. I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop, Celine admitted, for someone to show up and try to take this away. No one's taking anything, not anymore. You can't promise that. No. But I can promise that if anyone tries, they'll have to go through me first. And I'm significantly less pleasant when people threaten my family. Your family. Yeah, you, Elena, Marisol. This ridiculous life we've built out of shrapnel and spite, my family. Celine's eyes burned. I never thought I'd have this. Neither did I. So what do we do with it? We protect it. We nurture it. We teach Elena that love doesn't come with conditions or bruises or the requirement to make herself smaller so someone else can feel bigger. And we wake up every morning grateful that we survived long enough to build something worth protecting. Celine looked at him. This man who'd walked into a cathedral and shattered an empire, who'd given her safety when she'd forgotten what it felt like, who'd loved her through panic attacks and nightmares and the slow, painful work of learning to trust again. Who'd become her partner, not because he saved her, but because he'd stood beside her while she saved herself. Thank you, she whispered. For what? For seeing me, for staying, for building this with me. Dante took her hand. Thank you for letting me. Elena ran up to them, breathless and flushed, holding a firefly cupped carefully in her small hands. Look, Mama, I caught one. Celine knelt down to her level. You did. That's amazing. Now what do you do? Elena thought about it. Then she opened her hands and watched the firefly lift into the darkening sky, its light pulsing like a tiny heartbeat disappearing into the vast unknown. Let it go, Elena said seriously, so it can be free. Celine's throat closed up. That's exactly right, baby. That's exactly right. She pulled her daughter close and held her tight, while Dante watched with an expression that might have been love, or might have been pride, or might have been the recognition that sometimes the most radical thing you can do is simply survive and teach the next generation to do better. And as the fireflies danced across the lawn and the stars emerged overhead and the world turned beneath them, Celine Vale closed her eyes and let herself believe truly, deeply, without reservation, that she was finally, completely, irrevocably free. Not because someone granted her freedom, but because she'd claimed it. One choice at a time, one breath at a time, one day at a time. Until the woman who'd once stood trembling at an altar wearing a wedding dress that felt like a burial shroud had transformed into someone who stood tall in her own skin, building sanctuaries and raising a daughter and loving without fear. And that, she'd learned, was the truest kind of victory. Not the absence of scars, but the presence of healing. Not the erasure of pain, but the transformation of it into something that helped others survive their own darkness. Not the forgetting of where she'd been, but the celebration of how far she'd come. Celine opened her eyes. Dante smiled at her. Elena tugged on her hand. Mama, can we catch more fireflies? Yeah, baby, we can. And together, survivor, protector, and the future they'd built from the ruins of what almost destroyed them, they walked into the soft southern night and caught light in their hands. Again and again and again, until the darkness didn't seem so dark anymore. And the light they carried became bright enough to guide others home,